The moment my boss screamed, "You're fired," while my 8-year-old held her cereal spoon midair, I knew my life would never be the same. One Saturday morning destroyed everything Daniel Harper had spent 3 years rebuilding. His daughter witnessed the worst moment of his adult life. His career ended at his own kitchen table. And the woman who fired him? She had no idea she was about to change both their lives forever. But this isn't just a story about losing a job. It's about losing everything and finding something you never expected. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The coffee maker beeped at exactly 7:43 a.m. Daniel Harper stood at the kitchen counter in his small apartment, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and sweatpants that had seen better days. Saturday morning light filtered through the window above the sink, casting soft golden rectangles across the linoleum floor. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet scent of maple syrup warming in the microwave. "Daddy, can I have extra blueberries?" He turned to look at his daughter. Emma sat at their small wooden kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath her chair because they couldn't quite reach the floor yet. She was 8 years old, with her mother's dark curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that Daniel had attempted twice already that morning. Her pink pajamas had cartoon pandas on them, and there was already a small spot of orange juice on her sleeve. "Extra blueberries coming right up, sweetheart," Daniel said, pulling the container from the refrigerator. This was their Saturday ritual. Pancakes, blueberries, cartoons on low volume in the living room. No rushing, no schedules, no alarm clock screaming at them to move faster. Saturday mornings were sacred in the Harper household. They were the one time each week when Daniel could pretend that everything was normal, that their little family of 2 was doing just fine, that the weight on his shoulders wasn't slowly crushing him. He brought the blueberries to the table and sprinkled a generous handful onto Emma's stack of pancakes. She grinned up at him, that gap-toothed smile that could make him forget every hard thing about his life, at least for a moment. "Thank you, Daddy." "You're welcome, baby girl." Daniel sat down across from her with his own plate. 2 pancakes, light on the syrup because he'd gained 15 pounds since Sarah died, and his pants were starting to protest. He picked up his fork and was just about to take his first bite when the knocking started. Not knocking, really. Pounding. 3 hard strikes against the front door that made the picture frames on the wall rattle. Emma's eyes went wide, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "Daddy?" "It's okay, honey. Probably just the neighbor." Daniel set down his fork and stood up, his heart already beginning to beat faster despite his reassuring words. Nobody knocked like that on a Saturday morning. Nobody knocked like that unless something was wrong. He walked to the door, his bare feet cold against the hardwood floor of the hallway. Through the peephole, he saw a face he recognized immediately, and his stomach dropped like he'd just missed a step going downstairs. Victoria Lane, his boss. She was standing in the hallway of his apartment building, her designer coat wrapped tight around her shoulders, her normally perfect blonde hair slightly windswept, her expression carved from stone. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying recently, or maybe like she hadn't slept. She raised her fist and pounded on the door again. "Daniel, I know you're in there! Open this door right now!" Daniel's hand hovered over the deadbolt. His mind raced through possibilities. Had something happened at the office? Was there an emergency? But no. If it were a work emergency, she would have called. Everyone always called. The fact that she was here, at his home, at 7:45 on a Saturday morning, pounding on his door like she was trying to break it down. He unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Victoria stood before him, trembling with barely contained rage. Up close, she looked worse than she had through the peephole. Her mascara was slightly smudged beneath her eyes. Her lipstick had been chewed off her bottom lip. She was gripping a manila folder in her left hand so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. "Victoria, what? Do you have any idea?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. "What you've done?" "I don't understand. What's happening?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was brittle, cracked, like ice breaking under too much weight. "What's happening? What's happening?" Her voice rose on the second repetition, loud enough that Daniel instinctively glanced back toward the kitchen where Emma was sitting. "Victoria, please, my daughter is—" "The Morrison Project, Daniel." She held up the manila folder and shook it at him like a weapon. The Morrison Project, the $50 million Morrison Project, the project that was supposed to be submitted by midnight Thursday. Do you remember that project? Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. His lips went numb. I sent that. I finished it Wednesday night and I sent... You finished it! Victoria cut him off, her voice dripping with venom. Yes, Daniel, you finished it. Your work is right here in this folder. Beautiful work. Stunning work. Some of the best architectural designs I've ever seen in my 15 years in this industry. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. But you never sent it. That's not possible. I remember clicking send. I remember, check your outbox, Daniel. The scream echoed through the hallway, and somewhere on the floor below them, a dog started barking. Victoria's composure, whatever was left of it, had finally shattered. I checked it for you. The email is sitting in your drafts folder. It never sent. Daniel's legs felt weak. He reached out and grabbed the door frame to steady himself. The memory came back to him now, hazy and fragmented. Thursday night, 2 a.m, Emma crying in the next room, her fever spiking again, his phone buzzing with the reminder about the deadline, his fingers moving across the keyboard, attaching the files, typing the email address, and then Emma's voice, scared and small, calling out for him in the darkness. Daddy, I don't feel good. Daddy, my head hurts. He'd gotten up. He'd gone to her room. He'd spent the next 4 hours holding a cold washcloth to her forehead, giving her children's Tylenol, singing the lullaby her mother used to sing, waiting for the fever to break. And somewhere in those 4 hours, he'd convinced himself that he'd clicked send before he left his desk. He'd been so sure, so completely sure. Victoria, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can explain. My daughter was sick. She had a fever of 103, and I had to... I don't want your explanations. Victoria pushed past him into the apartment, her heels clicking against the hardwood. I don't want your excuses. Do you understand what happened yesterday, Daniel? Do you understand what I had to do because of your mistake? She was walking toward the kitchen now, and Daniel hurried after her, his heart pounding. Victoria, wait, please don't... But she was already there. Emma looked up from her pancakes, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She was still holding her fork, a piece of blueberry-stained pancake speared on the end of it. Her mouth was open slightly, her lower lip trembling at the sight of this stranger in their kitchen, this angry woman with the loud voice and the hard eyes. Victoria, Daniel said, placing himself between his boss and his daughter. Not in front of her, please. Whatever you need to say to me, we can go in the other room. Victoria laughed again, that same broken sound from before. Oh, now you want to be professional? Now you want boundaries? Where were your boundaries when you cost this company one of the biggest contracts in our history? Where were your boundaries when I had to sit in a boardroom yesterday and explain to our investors why the Morrison Group pulled out? They pulled out? Of course they pulled out. Victoria's voice cracked on the last word. Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, cutting tracks through her carefully applied makeup. They pulled out because we missed the deadline. They pulled out because in 35 years of business, we have never missed a deadline. They pulled out because they went with our competitor, Daniel, Harmon and Associates. Remember them? The firm that's been trying to put us out of business for the last decade? Daniel felt like he was going to be sick. $50 million. The Morrison Project, Harmon and Associates. Each word hit him like a physical blow. Victoria, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. If there's anything I can do, there is something you can do. Victoria straightened her spine, wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, and looked him dead in the eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, controlled, and absolutely devastating. You can pack up your desk. You can turn in your security badge, and you can never set foot in my building again. Behind Daniel, Emma made a small sound, a whimper, like a wounded animal. He didn't turn around. He couldn't turn around. If he looked at his daughter's face right now, he would break, and he couldn't afford to break. Not yet. You're firing me. I'm firing you, sir. Victoria nodded once, sharp and final. Effective immediately. HR will contact you on Monday about your severance package. I'd suggest you use this weekend to update your resume. Victoria, please, I have a daughter. I'm all she has. This job is the only thing keeping us. You should have thought about that before you decided to treat my company like it was your hobby." Victoria turned on her heel and walked back toward the front door. "I trusted you, Daniel. I gave you chance after chance. Every time you left early, every deadline you nearly missed, every meeting you forgot about, I looked the other way because I thought you were worth it, because I thought you cared." She stopped at the door and turned back to face him one last time. Her expression had changed. There was something else there now, beneath the anger, something that looked almost like grief. "I guess I was wrong." And then she was gone, the door slamming shut behind her with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Daniel stood frozen in the hallway, his mind completely blank. He couldn't think. He couldn't breathe. The entire world had narrowed down to this single moment, this single devastating reality. He had lost his job. He had no income. He had nothing. "Daddy?" Emma's voice cut through the fog like a knife. Daniel turned around slowly, feeling like his body belonged to someone else, like he was watching himself from very far away. His daughter was still sitting at the kitchen table, but she wasn't eating anymore. Her fork had fallen onto her plate, scattering blueberries across the tablecloth. Her face was pale, her eyes huge and frightened. "Daddy, why was that lady yelling at you?" Daniel walked to the table and sank into his chair. His legs couldn't hold him up anymore. He picked up his coffee cup and then set it down again without drinking. His hands were shaking so badly that he was afraid he'd spill it. "That was my boss, sweetheart." "The lady from your work?" "Yes, baby, the lady from my work." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness that only children can muster. Then she asked the question that Daniel had been dreading, the question that made everything real. "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" Daniel looked at his daughter, his beautiful, precious daughter who had already lost so much, who deserved so much better than a father who couldn't keep his life together, and felt his heart crack right down the middle. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. "Daddy's in a lot of trouble." The rest of Saturday passed in a blur. Daniel went through the motions of normal life because that was all he knew how to do. He washed the breakfast dishes while Emma watched cartoons in the living room. He made her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, cutting off the crust the way she liked. He helped her with her weekend homework assignment, a book report on Charlotte's Web that was due Monday, even though his mind was a million miles away. But behind every mundane action, the panic was building, like water behind a dam, like pressure in a sealed container. Sooner or later, something was going to give. At 3 o'clock, Emma went to her room for quiet time, their compromise after she'd declared herself too old for naps. Daniel sat down on the couch, pulled out his phone, and finally allowed himself to look at the damage. His email was open. There, in the drafts folder, exactly where Victoria had said it would be, was the Morrison Project. Every file attached, every detail perfect, every single piece of his best work, never seen by the people who needed to see it. He clicked into the email and stared at the recipient field. The cursor was blinking there, waiting patiently. He must have typed the address and then erased it by accident. Or maybe he'd meant to double-check it before sending. Or maybe it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. The deadline was passed. The client was gone. His job was over. Daniel closed his email and opened his banking app instead. The numbers that greeted him made his chest tight. Checking account, $847.32. Savings account, $2,150. $3,000. That was everything he had in the world. $3,000 to cover rent, utilities, food, Emma's school supplies, his car payment, insurance, all of it. His rent was $1,400 a month. That alone would wipe out almost half of what he had. And that was before he even thought about the other bills, the ones that seemed to multiply like rabbits, no matter how hard he tried to stay on top of them. How long could $3,000 last? A month? 6 weeks if he was extremely careful? And then what? Daniel's phone buzzed in his hand, a text message from his brother Michael. "Hey man, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Emma doing okay? Want to grab a beer sometime this week?" Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Michael lived 2 hours away. He had a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage of his own, problems of his own. The last thing he needed was his younger brother unloading on him about money and jobs and single parenting. "All good here," Daniel typed back. "Emma's great. Things are busy, but fine. Let's plan something soon." He hit send and then turned off his phone, unable to face any more of the world right now. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. In the silence, Daniel could hear the echo of Victoria's voice playing on repeat in his head like a song he couldn't stop listening to. "You're fired." 2 words. 2 simple words that had just detonated his entire life. He thought about getting up, about being productive, about starting to put together a plan. But the couch seemed to have developed its own gravity, holding him in place, pressing him down into the cushions. Moving required energy that he didn't have. Moving required hope, and his hope was running on empty. So instead, Daniel did something he hadn't done in 3 years. Not since the hospital, not since the funeral, not since the night he'd come home to an empty apartment and realized that Sarah was never coming back. He put his face in his hands and he cried. The tears came slowly at first, leaking through his fingers like water through a cracked dam. But soon they were flowing freely, accompanied by great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. All the grief, all the fear, all the exhaustion that he'd been pushing down for 3 years, it was all coming out now, whether he wanted it to or not. He cried for his job, for the career he'd spent a decade building, for the professional reputation that was now in tatters. He cried for his bank account, for the bills that would keep coming even though the paychecks had stopped. He cried for his daughter, who deserved a father who had his life together, who could give her stability and security and a future without fear. And underneath it all, buried so deep that he almost couldn't recognize it anymore, he cried for Sarah, his wife, his partner, his best friend, the woman who had been his anchor through every storm, who had known exactly what to say when the world felt like it was falling apart, who had made him believe that everything would be okay, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. She'd been gone for 3 years, but in moments like this, the wound was as fresh as the day she'd died. They'd been college sweethearts, Daniel and Sarah. He was studying architecture. She was getting her degree in elementary education. They'd met at a party thrown by mutual friends, bonded over their shared love of terrible horror movies, and spent the next 10 years building a life together. Marriage at 24. A cramped first apartment with bad plumbing and a view of the freeway. The slow climb up the career ladder, his and hers, and then Emma, beautiful, perfect, miraculous Emma, arriving on a snowy February morning and changing everything. For 5 years, they'd been a family. A real family. The kind Daniel had always dreamed of having. They had Sunday dinners and bedtime routines and inside jokes that nobody else understood. They had fights about loading the dishwasher and making up in the kitchen while Emma watched Frozen for the 100th time. They had plans, so many plans. A bigger house, maybe another baby, a vacation to Disney World that they'd been saving for. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, a delivery truck ran a red light. Sarah died in the ambulance. The doctor said she probably hadn't felt much pain. The doctor said a lot of things, actually, comforting words designed to help him process, to grieve, to eventually move on. Daniel had nodded at all of them, said thank you, filled out the paperwork, and then gone home to explain to his 5-year-old daughter why mommy wasn't coming back. That conversation had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than the funeral, harder than sorting through Sarah's clothes, her jewelry, her books, harder than sleeping alone in their bed for the first time in 8 years. Emma had cried. God, how she'd cried. For weeks, she would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming for her mother, and Daniel would hold her and rock her and promise her that everything would be okay, even though he didn't believe it himself. Eventually, the screaming stopped. The tears became less frequent. Life resumed its forward motion, as life always does. But something had been broken in both of them, something fundamental, something that couldn't be fixed with time or therapy or positive thinking. Daniel had thrown himself into work. It was the only way he knew how to cope. If he was busy, he didn't have to think. If he was designing buildings, he didn't have to feel. He stayed late at the office, brought projects home on weekends, said yes to every assignment his boss threw at him. His colleagues called him dedicated. His supervisors called him invaluable. Daniel called it survival. But the hours were brutal, and single parenting was harder than anyone ever told you it would be. There were missed parent-teacher conferences and forgotten permission slips and dinners that consisted of whatever could be delivered in under 30 minutes. There were mornings when Emma went to school with her hair unbrushed because Daniel had been up until 2 a.m. finishing a presentation. There were nights when he fell asleep at his desk and woke up at dawn with keyboard imprints on his cheek. He was burning himself out, and he knew it. Everyone knew it. His brother had mentioned it gently, then less gently, then finally stopped mentioning it at all because Daniel refused to listen. His coworkers had started giving him looks, pitying looks, the kind you give someone who's clearly drowning but won't accept a life preserver. And then, 6 months ago, Victoria Lane had arrived. She'd bought the firm from the previous owner, a kindly man in his 60s who had given Daniel plenty of rope and looked the other way when he needed it. Victoria was different. Victoria was sharp, ambitious, ruthlessly efficient. She'd made it clear from day one that she expected excellence, that she didn't accept excuses, that anyone who couldn't meet her standards would be shown the door. Daniel had tried. God knows he'd tried. He'd doubled down on his work, sacrificed even more sleep, pushed himself even harder. But it was never enough. The deadlines kept piling up, the mistakes kept happening, and Victoria's patience, whatever limited supply she'd had, kept wearing thinner. Now sitting on his couch with tears drying on his cheeks, Daniel could see the whole trajectory of the last 3 years laid out before him like a roadmap of failure. Every wrong turn, every missed opportunity, every moment when he should have asked for help, but was too proud, too scared, too stubborn to do it. He'd been trying to do the impossible, to be both a full-time father and a full-time employee, to give 100% to Emma and 100% to his career, to prove to the world that he didn't need anyone, that he could handle everything on his own. And now he was paying the price. "Daddy?" Daniel looked up, quickly wiping his face with his hands. Emma was standing in the doorway of the living room, her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flops, a gift from Sarah on Emma's 3rd birthday, clutched against her chest. "Hey, sweetheart. Quiet time over already?" Emma didn't answer the question. Instead, she walked slowly across the room and climbed onto the couch next to him, curling her small body against his side. "Your eyes are red," she said. "I know, baby." "Were you crying?" Daniel hesitated. His instinct was to lie, to protect her, to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. But Emma was 8 years old now, not a toddler. She was smart, observant, and she'd seen enough in her short life to know when adults were hiding things from her. "Yes," he said finally. "I was crying. Because of the loud lady. Partly because of her. And partly because of other things." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, very softly, "I cry sometimes too, when I think about Mommy." Daniel's throat tightened. "I know you do, sweetheart. It's okay to cry. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. She says crying is how our hearts talk when our mouths can't find the words." Mrs. Patterson was Emma's school counselor, a gentle woman who had been meeting with Emma once a week since Sarah's death. Daniel had never met her in person. Another failure, another item on his ever-growing list of things he should have done but didn't. But he was grateful for her now, grateful that someone was teaching his daughter the things he didn't know how to teach. "Mrs. Patterson sounds very wise." "She is." Emma snuggled closer, pressing her face against his arm. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" It was the question he'd been asking himself all day. The question that had no good answer, no honest answer, no answer that wouldn't terrify an 8-year-old girl who'd already lost her mother. Daniel wrapped his arm around his daughter and pulled her close. He could smell her shampoo, strawberry, her favorite, and feel the warmth of her small body against his. This was what mattered. This was the only thing that mattered. "Yes," he said, making a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "We're going to be okay. I'm going to make sure of it." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. That's what daddies do." Emma seemed to accept this. She relaxed against him, her breathing evening out, her fingers playing absently with Mr. Flops's worn ears. "Daddy?" "Yes, baby?" "I'm glad you're my daddy." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. All the fear, all the panic, all the self-doubt that had been consuming him, it all faded away, just for a moment, replaced by something else, something stronger, something that had nothing to do with bank accounts or job prospects or the disaster his life had become. Love. Pure, unconditional, overwhelming love. "I'm glad you're my daughter," he said, kissing the top of her head. "The gladdest I've ever been about anything." They sat like that for a long time, father and daughter, wrapped together against a world that had done its best to break them. The afternoon light slowly shifted, moving across the floor like a tide going out. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off and then stopped. The refrigerator hummed its constant, monotonous song. And Daniel Harper, fired architect and struggling single father, made a decision. He was not going to give up. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how he was going to pay the bills or find a new job or explain to Emma why her life was about to change again. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would fight. He would keep going. He would do whatever it took to give his daughter the life she deserved. Not because he was strong, not because he had all the answers, but because she was counting on him, and he would rather die than let her down. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. The table was old, scratched, a hand-me-down from his parents that had survived 2 moves and countless meals. It was too big for the apartment, really, designed for a family of 4 or 5, not a father and daughter who usually ate dinner on the couch while watching nature documentaries. But Daniel couldn't bring himself to get rid of it. It reminded him of Sunday dinners from his childhood, of homework sessions with his brother, of the first apartment he and Sarah had shared when they were young and broke and impossibly happy. He opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "Plan." Then he stared at the blank space below, waiting for inspiration to strike. It didn't. What was he supposed to do? Apply for other architecture jobs? That was the obvious answer, but it wasn't that simple. The architecture community in the city was small, incestuous. Word would get around about what had happened at Victoria's firm, the missed deadline, the lost client, the dramatic firing. Nobody wanted to hire the guy who cost his last company $50 million. He could move to another city, start over somewhere fresh. But that would mean uprooting Emma again, taking her away from her school, her friends, her counselor, the small support system she'd managed to build in the years since her mother's death. And how would he afford a move? Moving wasn't cheap. New apartments required deposits, first and last month's rent. New cities meant new costs, new challenges, new unknowns. Daniel rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Maybe he could freelance, pick up small projects here and there, residential stuff that didn't require the resources of a full firm. He'd done it before, back when he was first starting out, before Sarah, before Emma, before everything got so complicated. It wouldn't pay as well as his old salary, but something was better than nothing. But freelancing required clients, and clients required networking, and networking required time. Time to attend events, to schmooze, to build relationships. Time he didn't have because every spare minute of his life was already devoted to Emma. The pen hovered over the paper, motionless. What if there was no solution? What if this was simply the end of the road, the moment when all of his mistakes finally caught up with him? When the universe finally decided that he'd used up all his second chances. He thought about his parents, who had passed away within a year of each other while he was in college. He thought about Michael, who had his own family to worry about and couldn't be expected to bail out his little brother. He thought about Sarah's parents, who had moved to Florida after the funeral and only sent birthday cards now, as if physical distance could erase the pain of losing their only daughter. He was alone, completely, utterly alone. No, not alone. He had Emma, and Emma was enough. She had to be enough. Daniel looked down at the notebook and wrote, 1. Update resume. 2. Apply for unemployment benefits. 3. Cancel unnecessary subscriptions. 4. Look into freelance opportunities. It wasn't much of a plan, 4 items on a list, but it was something, a starting point, a reason to get out of bed tomorrow and keep moving forward. He closed the notebook and stood up, his back aching from sitting in the uncomfortable kitchen chair. The clock on the microwave said 11:47 p.m. Tomorrow was Sunday. Another day at home with Emma. Another day of pretending everything was fine while his world slowly collapsed around him. But also another day of being her father. Another day of pancakes and cartoons and bedtime stories. Another day of the only thing that truly mattered. Daniel turned off the kitchen light and walked to Emma's room. He stood in her doorway, watching her sleep. She was curled on her side, Mr. Flops tucked under her chin, her face peaceful and untroubled. In sleep, she looked so much like Sarah that it made his heart ache, the same curve of her cheek, the same way her hair fell across her forehead, the same small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I'm going to fix this," he whispered to her sleeping form. "I promise, baby. I'm going to fix this." He didn't know how, he didn't know when, but he knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic or reason, that he would not let his daughter down. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifice he had to make, whatever part of himself he had to give, he would find a way. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched Daniel's mood perfectly. He made pancakes again, chocolate chip this time, because he figured they both needed a treat, and watched Emma devour them with the enthusiasm of someone who had no idea that her entire world was balanced on a knife's edge. She talked about school while she ate, about her best friend Madison and their teacher Mrs. Wilson and the boy named Tyler who kept pulling her hair during recess. "Tyler sounds like a troublemaker," Daniel said, sipping his coffee. "He is. Madison says he only pulls hair because he likes me, but I think that's dumb. If you like someone, you should be nice to them, not mean." "That's very wise, sweetheart." "That's what I told Madison, but she just laughed and said I'd understand when I'm older." Daniel smiled despite himself. 8 years old and already dealing with the complexities of human relationships. Some things never changed, no matter what generation you belong to. After breakfast, they played board games, Candyland, then Sorry, then a particularly brutal round of Uno that ended with Emma crowing victoriously while Daniel pretended to be devastated by his loss. They watched a movie together, some animated thing about a talking dog that made Emma laugh so hard she spilled her popcorn. They ordered pizza for dinner, pepperoni and mushroom, their usual. It was a good day, a normal day. The kind of day Daniel had taken for granted when he still had a job and a paycheck and a future that didn't terrify him. But underneath the laughter and the games and the pizza, the fear was always there, lurking like a shadow he couldn't escape. Every time he looked at Emma, he thought about the bills waiting in his inbox. Every time she smiled, he thought about the rent that would be due in 3 weeks. Every time she said "Daddy," he wondered how long he could keep pretending that everything was going to be okay. At 8 o'clock, he tucked her into bed and read her a chapter from Harry Potter. They were on the 3rd book now, the one with the time travel, which Emma thought was the coolest thing ever. He kissed her forehead, turned on her nightlight, and walked to the door. "Daddy?" He turned back. "Yes, sweetheart?" Emma was looking at him with those big, serious eyes, the ones that saw more than any 8-year-old should have to see. "I love you." 3 words. The simplest words in any language. But coming from her in that moment, they felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "I love you too, baby girl, more than you'll ever know." He closed the door halfway the way she liked it and stood in the hallway for a long moment, gathering his strength for whatever came next. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow, reality would come crashing back in. There would be phone calls to make, emails to send, pride to swallow. There would be rejection and disappointment and probably more tears. But tonight, there was this. A warm apartment, a sleeping daughter, and the knowledge that no matter what happened, he wasn't truly alone. Daniel Harper took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked into the dark. The alarm clock didn't go off Monday morning because Daniel had forgotten to set it. He woke instead to the sound of Emma's voice, small and worried, calling from the doorway of his bedroom. "Daddy? Daddy, are you okay?" Daniel opened his eyes and immediately knew something was wrong. The light coming through the window was too bright, too golden. This wasn't early morning light. This was mid-morning light, the kind of light that meant he had overslept by at least 2 hours. He sat up so fast that his head spun. "What time is it?" "I don't know, but my show is already on and it doesn't come on until 9. 9 o'clock. Emma was supposed to be at school by 8:15. He was supposed to be, well, nowhere now. But the old routine was so ingrained that his body had responded with pure panic before his brain caught up to the new reality. He wasn't late for work. He didn't have work anymore. The realization settled over him like a wet blanket, heavy and cold. For just a moment, in those first seconds of waking, he had forgotten. He had been normal Daniel, employed Daniel, Daniel with a purpose and a paycheck and a place to be. Now he was just Daniel, unemployed Daniel, fired Daniel. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "We're going to have a lazy day today." "But what about school?" Daniel looked at his daughter, still standing in the doorway in her panda pajamas, her hair a wild tangle around her face. She looked confused, uncertain. Emma liked routine. She needed routine. It was one of the things the counselor had emphasized after Sarah's death. Children who experience trauma crave predictability, structure, the comfort of knowing what comes next. And here he was, already disrupting her world. "Tell you what," he said, forcing a smile onto his face. "How about we call it a mental health day? Everyone needs those sometimes. We can make waffles for breakfast, and then maybe go to the park if it's nice outside." Emma's face brightened slightly. "Can we get ice cream too?" Ice cream. $3, maybe $4, that he couldn't really afford to spend. But his daughter was looking at him with such hope, such innocent expectation, that he couldn't bring himself to say no. "We'll see how the day goes," he said, which was parent speak for probably yes. Emma bounced away toward the living room, her momentary concern already forgotten. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, trying to summon the energy to stand up and face another day of uncertainty. 3 years. That's how long it had been since Sarah died. 3 years of holding everything together with duct tape and willpower. 3 years of pretending he was fine when he was anything but. And now, finally, inevitably, the facade had crumbled. He thought about calling his brother. Michael had texted again last night, a simple, "You sure everything's okay?" that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by Daniel's earlier assurances. But what would Daniel say? "Hey Mike, I got fired on Saturday. My boss showed up at my apartment and screamed at me in front of my daughter. I have $3,000 to my name and no idea how I'm going to pay next month's rent. Can you help?" The words wouldn't come. They stuck in his throat like stones, too heavy to lift, too painful to release. Michael had his own problems. His wife had been talking about going back to work now that their kids were older, which meant they needed to find childcare, which meant more expenses. His mortgage had just increased because of some property tax adjustment that Daniel didn't fully understand. The last thing Michael needed was his younger brother adding to his burdens. No. Daniel would figure this out on his own. He had to. He finally stood up, his joints protesting after another night of restless sleep, and walked to the bathroom. The face that greeted him in the mirror was not encouraging. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, a 3-day beard that had passed from rugged to unkempt, shoulders hunched forward like he was trying to protect himself from an invisible threat. "Get it together," he told his reflection. "You have a kid depending on you." His reflection didn't look convinced. After a quick shower and a slightly less quick wrestling match with Emma's hair, they sat down to waffles. Daniel had found a box of frozen ones in the back of the freezer, hidden behind some chicken nuggets and a bag of peas that had probably been there since the previous tenant. They weren't great waffles, a little freezer burned, a little soggy in the middle, but Emma covered hers in so much syrup that she didn't seem to notice. "Daddy," she said between bites, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. You can always ask me anything." "Why did that lady fire you?" Daniel set down his fork. He had known this conversation was coming, had been dreading it since Saturday morning, but that didn't make it any easier now that it was here. "It's complicated, baby." That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain things. Despite everything, Daniel felt a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. She was too smart, his daughter, too observant, too much like her mother. "You're right. I'm sorry." He took a deep breath, trying to find words that would be honest without being frightening. "I made a mistake at work. A big mistake. I was supposed to send something important to someone, and I forgot to do it. And because I forgot, my boss lost a lot of money." "How much money?" "A lot. More than I can even explain." Emma considered this, her forehead wrinkling in concentration. "But everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Mrs. Wilson says mistakes are how we learn." Mrs. Wilson is right. But sometimes, when grown-ups make mistakes at work, there are consequences. And sometimes those consequences are that you can't work there anymore. That doesn't seem fair. No, Daniel agreed quietly. It doesn't. Emma was quiet for a moment, pushing a piece of waffle around her plate. Then she looked up at him with those big, serious eyes. Was it my fault? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. What? No, sweetheart, why would you think that? Because you said you forgot to send the thing, and Thursday night I was sick, and you stayed with me all night. So maybe if I hadn't been sick, you would have remembered to send it. Daniel reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. Her fingers were sticky with syrup, but he didn't care. Listen to me very carefully, Emma. This was not your fault. None of this was your fault. You were sick, and I took care of you because that's what daddies do. That's my job, my real job, my most important job. If I made a mistake at my other job, that's on me, not you. Do you understand? Emma nodded slowly, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. I mean it, Daniel said firmly. I will always choose you. Always. No job is more important than you. No deadline is more important than making sure you're okay. If I had to do Thursday night over again, I would do exactly the same thing. I would stay with you. I would hold the cold washcloth on your forehead. I would sing you Mommy's song every single time. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. I miss Mommy's song. I know, baby. I miss her too. Can you sing it to me the way she used to? Daniel's throat tightened. Sarah had been the singer in their family, a beautiful voice that could turn any simple melody into something magical. Daniel couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, as his mother used to say. But he had learned Sarah's lullaby by heart, every note, every pause, every gentle swell. He had sung it to Emma hundreds of times since Sarah died, even though it hurt every single time. Later, he promised, tonight, at bedtime. I'll sing it to you then. Emma nodded, satisfied. She went back to her waffles, the crisis apparently resolved in her 8-year-old mind. Daniel watched her eat and felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of some knot that had been pulled tight for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He had made the right choice on Thursday night. He knew that now, with a certainty that went beyond logic. His daughter had needed him, and he had been there. That was what mattered. That was what would always matter. The rest, the job, the money, the future, he would figure out somehow. The morning passed slowly, marked by small domestic tasks and the comfortable rhythm of time spent together. Daniel washed the breakfast dishes while Emma got dressed, choosing her own outfit with the fierce independence of a child who had learned too young that she couldn't always rely on adults to take care of everything. She emerged from her room in mismatched socks, a purple shirt, and green pants that clashed spectacularly with everything. You look beautiful, Daniel told her, and meant it. They went to the park around 11 when the late morning sun had burned off the last of the previous day's drizzle. The playground was mostly empty. A few toddlers with their mothers, an older man walking his dog, a teenager sitting on a bench with headphones in, bobbing his head to music only he could hear. Emma ran immediately to the swings, her favorite spot, and Daniel pushed her until his arms ached. She pumped her legs and laughed and demanded to go higher, always higher, reaching for a sky that seemed impossibly far away. I can see the whole world from up here, she shouted. Daniel smiled and pushed harder. After the swings came the slide, then the monkey bars, which Emma could now cross all by herself, a skill she had mastered just last month, then a complicated game involving the climbing structure that she made up as she went along. Daniel sat on a bench and watched her play, letting his mind wander to places he usually kept carefully locked away. He thought about the first time he had brought Emma to this park. She had been 2 years old, barely walking, gripping Sarah's hand on one side and his on the other. They had put her in the baby swing, the one with the bucket seat and the safety bar, and she had laughed so hard that other parents had turned to look at them with amused smiles. She's going to be a daredevil, Sarah had said, watching their daughter's face light up with each swing. I can tell already. She gets it from you, Daniel had replied. I'm the cautious one, remember? You're the one who wanted to go skydiving for our anniversary. And you're the one who talked me into that nice, safe dinner cruise instead. Boring. Romantic. Boring and romantic, the worst combination. But she had been smiling when she said it, and he had pulled her close and kissed her right there in the middle of the playground, not caring who saw. They had been so young then, so certain that their happiness would last forever. So naive. Daniel blinked and found that his cheeks were wet. He wiped his eyes quickly, glancing around to make sure Emma hadn't noticed. She was on the climbing structure now, deep in some imaginary adventure that required a lot of dramatic gesturing and occasional whispered dialogue. Safe, happy, oblivious to her father's grief. Good. That was good. She didn't need to carry his sadness on top of her own. They got ice cream on the way home, just as he'd promised. Emma chose chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. Daniel got vanilla, the cheapest option on the menu. They sat on a bench outside the shop and ate in comfortable silence, watching cars pass by on the street and people hurry about their Monday business. "Daddy," Emma said eventually, "what are you going to do now?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "For work, since you don't have a job anymore. Are you going to get a new one?" Daniel licked a drip of ice cream from his cone, buying himself a moment to think. "I'm going to try," he said finally. "It might take a little while, though. Finding a new job can be tricky." "What if you can't find one?" It was the question he had been asking himself all weekend, the question that kept him awake at night and gnawed at the edges of his consciousness during the day. He didn't have a good answer, but Emma was looking at him expectantly, waiting for reassurance, waiting to be told that everything would be okay. "Then we'll figure something else out," he said. "Maybe I'll start my own business. Or maybe I'll find a different kind of job, something I've never tried before. The important thing is that we'll be together, no matter what. That's what matters most." Emma considered this, then nodded with the decisive certainty of someone who has never had to worry about rent or utilities or health insurance. "Okay," she said. "I believe you." If only it were that simple, Daniel thought. If only believing were enough to make it true. They finished their ice cream and walked home, Emma skipping ahead while Daniel followed at a slower pace, his mind already turning to the practical matters that awaited him. Unemployment paperwork, job applications, the dreaded task of updating his resume, which hadn't been touched in years. But when they got back to the apartment, there was something waiting for them that pushed all other thoughts aside. An envelope slipped under the door. Daniel picked it up and felt his stomach drop. He recognized the logo in the corner immediately, the management company that owned his building. He knew what this was before he even opened it. "What's that, Daddy?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Why don't you go play in your room for a little while? I need to do some grown-up stuff." Emma, thankfully, didn't argue. She bounced off toward her room, still energized from the ice cream, and Daniel was alone in the hallway with the envelope that was about to make his bad situation even worse. He opened it with trembling fingers. The letter was brief, professional, utterly devastating. Due to recent changes in building policy, rent would be increasing by $200 per month effective the 1st of next month. Current tenants were encouraged to review their lease agreements and contact the management office with any questions. $200. On top of the $1,400 he was already paying, on top of the fact that he now had no income whatsoever. Daniel crumpled the letter in his fist and leaned against the wall, squeezing his eyes shut against the wave of despair that threatened to overwhelm him. How? How was this his life? 6 months ago, he had been a respected architect at a successful firm, earning enough to cover his bills with a little left over for savings. Now he was unemployed, nearly broke, and about to be priced out of his own apartment. Maybe this was karma. Maybe this was the universe's way of punishing him for every mistake he had ever made, every deadline he had missed, every meeting he had forgotten, every time he had chosen Emma over his career. But that wasn't fair. Emma wasn't a mistake. Emma was the only thing he had done right. She was the only good thing left in a world that seemed determined to break him. He uncrumpled the letter and read it again, hoping he had missed something, some fine print that would make this better. But the words were the same. $200 more per month, starting in 4 weeks. 4 weeks to find a job. 4 weeks to somehow pull himself together and become employable again. 4 weeks to prevent his daughter from losing her home on top of everything else she had already lost. The task felt impossible. The odds felt insurmountable. But as Daniel stood there in his tiny hallway, holding the crumpled letter in his shaking hands, He thought about Emma's face when she said she believed him. He thought about the trust in her eyes, the faith she placed in him simply because he was her father. He couldn't give up. He didn't have that luxury. He smoothed out the letter, folded it neatly, and put it in his pocket. Then he went to the kitchen table, opened his notebook to the plan he had started on Saturday night, and added a fifth item to the list. 5. Find cheaper apartment, backup plan. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something right now was all he had. The week that followed was one of the longest of Daniel's life. Each day blurred into the next, marked by rejection emails, unreturned phone calls, and the slow erosion of hope. He applied for unemployment on Tuesday, navigating a Byzantine online system that seemed designed to frustrate and confuse. The website crashed 3 times. His password didn't work. When he finally managed to submit his claim, he received an automated email informing him that processing could take up to 4 weeks. 4 weeks, the same amount of time he had until his rent increased. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. On Wednesday, he updated his resume and sent it to every architecture firm in the city, 18 of them in total, ranging from massive corporations to tiny boutique studios. He tailored each cover letter, highlighting different aspects of his experience, expressing enthusiasm for each company's unique approach. He spent hours crafting these applications, pouring every ounce of his professional self into words on a screen. By Friday, he had received exactly 3 responses. 2 were automated rejections, form letters thanking him for his interest but informing him that the position had been filled. The 3rd was from a small firm on the other side of town, asking him to come in for an interview the following week. Hope flickered briefly, a small flame in the darkness. But when Daniel researched the firm, his hope dimmed. They specialized in strip mall renovations and warehouse conversions, work that paid the bills but offered none of the creative challenge he craved. And the salary they listed in the job posting was barely half of what he had been making at Victoria's firm. Half. As if he hadn't already been struggling to make ends meet. He scheduled the interview anyway. What choice did he have? The weekend arrived, bringing with it the exhaustion that had been accumulating all week. Daniel spent Saturday morning on the couch while Emma watched cartoons, too tired to pretend he was fine. He should have been updating his LinkedIn profile or reaching out to old colleagues or doing any of the 100 productive things that unemployed people were supposed to do. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the bills piling up in his inbox. "Daddy, are you sick?" Emma had appeared beside the couch, her face worried. She was holding a glass of water in both hands, offering it to him the way he always offered her water when she was feeling poorly. "No, baby, just tired." "You should take a nap. That's what you always tell me when I'm tired." Daniel managed a small smile. "You're right. That is what I always tell you." He sat up and took the water, drinking half of it in one long gulp. "Thank you, sweetheart. That was very thoughtful." Emma climbed onto the couch beside him, curling against his side the way she always did when she wanted comfort. "Daddy?" "Yes?" "I'm scared." The word hit him like a punch. "Scared? Of what?" "I don't know." Emma picked at a thread on her shirt, not meeting his eyes. "Everything feels different. You're home all the time now, and you're always sad, and sometimes when I wake up at night I hear you walking around, like you can't sleep." Daniel closed his eyes. He had tried so hard to hide his struggles from her, to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. But children were perceptive creatures. They noticed things. They felt things. And Emma, who had already lost her mother, was especially attuned to the subtle signs that her world might be shifting again. "Come here," he said, pulling her closer. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to really listen." "Can you do that?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide. "You're right that things are different right now, and you're right that I'm worried about some stuff. But I want you to know something very important." He tilted her chin up so she was looking directly at him. "No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, I will always be here for you. Always. That's never going to change." "Promise?" "I promise. Cross my heart." He drew an X over his chest, the gesture they had invented together when Emma was 3, and promises needed to be made official. She watched him do it, then drew her own X over her own heart. "Cross my heart," she echoed. They sat together for a long time after that, watching the cartoon characters on the screen go through their colorful, uncomplicated adventures. Outside, the October sun moved across the sky, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the apartment floor. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in one small home in one small corner of the city. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel did something he had been putting off for years. He went to the closet in the hallway, the one where he stored things he couldn't bear to look at but couldn't bring himself to throw away, and pulled down a cardboard box from the top shelf. Sarah's things. Not all of them. Most of her belongings had been donated or given to family members in the months after her death, but there were some things Daniel had kept. Small items, personal items, pieces of her that he couldn't let go of, even though keeping them caused him pain. He sat on the hallway floor with the box in his lap and began to sort through its contents. A scarf that still smelled faintly of her perfume. A notebook filled with her handwriting, lists, ideas, sketches for craft projects she had never gotten around to finishing. Their wedding photo, the one that used to sit on his nightstand until looking at it became too painful. And at the bottom of the box, underneath everything else, a letter. Daniel recognized it immediately. Sarah had given it to him on their 10th anniversary, just 6 months before the accident. She had been worried about something, she never told him what, and she had written this letter as a kind of insurance, a message to be opened in case something happens to me. He had opened it once, 3 days after the funeral, and the words had destroyed him so completely that he had put it back in the box and never looked at it again. But now, sitting on the floor of his cramped apartment with his life falling apart around him, he felt a sudden desperate need to hear her voice again. Even if it was just words on paper, even if it would break his heart all over again. He unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "My dearest Daniel," it began. "If you're reading this, then something has happened, and I'm not there anymore. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to leave Emma. But life doesn't always give us what we want, and I've learned that the only thing we can control is how we face the things we can't control. I know you're probably drowning right now. I know you're probably blaming yourself for things that aren't your fault. I know you're probably trying to hold everything together by yourself because that's who you are. My stubborn, independent, impossible husband who never asks for help even when he desperately needs it. But I need you to hear something, and I need you to really listen. It's okay to fall apart. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to not have all the answers. You don't have to be perfect, Daniel. You just have to be there. Emma is going to need you. Not the polished, professional version of you. Not the version that has everything figured out. She's going to need the real you, the messy, imperfect, human you. The you that cries sometimes and makes mistakes and doesn't always know what to do. That's the you I fell in love with. That's the you who's going to raise our daughter, right? Not because you're flawless, but because you're present. Because you show up. Because you keep trying, even when trying feels impossible. I believe in you, my love. I've always believed in you, and I need you to believe in yourself, even when I'm not there to remind you. Take care of our girl. Take care of yourself. And know that wherever I am, I'm loving you. I never stopped. I never will. Forever yours, Sarah. Daniel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. By the 3rd reading, the words had blurred so badly that he could barely make them out, but it didn't matter. He knew them by heart now. They were burned into his soul. She had known. Somehow, impossibly, Sarah had known exactly what he would need to hear, 3 years after her death, on the worst night of his post-funeral life. She had written him a roadmap for survival, and he had been too afraid to follow it. It's okay to fall apart, she had written. It's okay to be scared. He had been so busy trying to be strong, for Emma, for his job, for the image of himself that he desperately wanted to maintain, that he had forgotten to actually feel. He had buried his grief beneath work and routine, convinced that as long as he kept moving, he wouldn't have to face the pain. But you couldn't outrun grief. Sarah had understood that. She had been trying to tell him, even from beyond the grave, that falling apart wasn't weakness. It was necessary. It was the only way to eventually put yourself back together. Daniel folded the letter carefully and pressed it against his chest. He stayed there on the hallway floor for a long time, letting himself cry, letting himself feel. letting himself be the messy, imperfect human that Sarah had loved. When he finally stood up, his legs were stiff and his eyes were swollen. But something had shifted inside him. The weight on his shoulders felt slightly lighter. The darkness ahead seemed slightly less terrifying. He wasn't okay. He might not be okay for a long time, but he was still here, still standing, still fighting, and tomorrow he would keep going. For Emma, for Sarah, for himself. The interview on Monday did not go well. Daniel arrived at the small architecture firm 15 minutes early, wearing his best suit, the one Sarah had helped him pick out for their anniversary dinner, back when such things still mattered. He had shaved, combed his hair, practiced his answers in front of the bathroom mirror until he could recite them without stumbling. But the moment he sat down across from the hiring manager, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Gerald, Daniel knew something was wrong. "So," Gerald said, flipping through Daniel's resume without really looking at it, "you used to work for Lane Architecture, Victoria Lane's firm." "Yes, for about 4 years." "I see. And you left recently." "That's correct." Gerald finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Harper. I've heard some things about your departure." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "The kind of things that make me question whether you're the right fit for our team." Gerald set down the resume and folded his hands on the desk. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I know the whole story, but word gets around in this industry. Small community, you know? And the word about you is, well, it's not great." Daniel wanted to defend himself. He wanted to explain about Thursday night, about Emma's fever, about the email that had never been sent. But what was the point? Gerald had already made up his mind. The interview was over before it had even really begun. "I understand," Daniel said quietly. "Thank you for your time." He stood up and walked out of the office with as much dignity as he could muster. The secretary didn't even look up as he passed. The elevator seemed to take forever to arrive. And when he finally stepped out onto the street, the October wind cutting through his suit like it wasn't even there, Daniel felt something inside him finally crack. 3 years of building a reputation, 3 years of late nights and early mornings and sacrifices that nobody noticed. And it had all been erased by one mistake, one oversight, one email sitting in a drafts folder. He found a bench near a bus stop and sat down, ignoring the curious looks from passing strangers. His hands were shaking, his heart was pounding. For a terrifying moment he thought he might be having a heart attack, but no, this was just panic, pure, overwhelming panic. What was he going to do? If the industry had already blacklisted him, then applying to other firms was pointless. And if he couldn't find work as an architect, what else was he qualified for? He had spent his entire adult life designing buildings. It was the only thing he knew how to do. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from Michael. "Tried calling, but it went to voicemail. Getting worried about you, bro. Call me when you get a chance. Please." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. His thumb hovered over the call button, trembling slightly. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he pressed the button and lifted the phone to his ear. Michael answered on the second ring. "Danny? Thank God, I was starting to think you'd fallen off the face of the earth." "Hey, Mike. Hey, Mike me. You sound terrible. What's going on?" Daniel opened his mouth to deliver his usual reassurances, the ones he had been practicing for 3 years. "Everything's fine, just busy, nothing to worry about." But the words wouldn't come. They stuck in his throat, refusing to emerge. "Danny, you still there?" "I lost my job." The words came out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. Once they started, he couldn't stop them. "I lost my job, Mike. My boss fired me on Saturday. She came to my apartment and screamed at me in front of Emma. I missed a deadline because Emma was sick, and I forgot to send an email, and now everyone in the industry knows, and I just bombed an interview, and I have $3,000 in the bank, and rent is going up, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do." Silence on the other end of the line. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for what? Judgment? Disappointment? An awkward attempt at comfort followed by a quick excuse to end the call? But when Michael spoke, his voice was gentle. "Okay, that's a lot. But it's going to be okay, Danny. We're going to figure this out." "How? How are we going to figure this out?" "Together." That's how. Look, I'm getting in the car right now. I can be there in 2 hours. We'll talk through everything, make a plan. You're not alone in this, Danny. You never were. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Tears were streaming down his face again, but these were different from the tears he had cried on the hallway floor. These were tears of relief. You don't have to do that, Mike. You have your own stuff going on. Jenny and the kids will be fine without me for one evening. You're my brother, Danny. My little brother. And you've been drowning for 3 years while I sat on my hands and did nothing because you kept telling me everything was fine. Well, clearly everything is not fine, so I'm coming. End of discussion. Daniel laughed, a broken, watery sound. You're so bossy. I learned from the best. Mom was bossy as hell, remember? God, yes, she was terrifying. She was perfect. Michael's voice softened. She would have known exactly what to say right now. I'm not as good at this stuff as she was. But I'm going to try. For you, for Emma, because that's what family does. They talked for a few more minutes. Logistics, timing, what to tell Emma, before Michael had to hang up and start driving. Daniel sat on the bench for a long time after the call ended, watching the people pass by, feeling the cold October wind on his face. He wasn't okay. His life was still falling apart. But for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't carrying the weight alone. And that, he was beginning to realize, made all the difference. Michael arrived at 6 o'clock, just as Daniel was finishing dinner. He burst through the apartment door like a force of nature, immediately sweeping Emma into a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "Uncle Mike!" Emma shrieked with delight. "You're here! You're really here!" "Of course I'm here, Munchkin. Did you really think I'd let another month go by without seeing my favorite niece? I'm your only niece. That makes you the favorite by default. It's simple math." Michael set her down and ruffled her hair affectionately. "Now, I hear there might be ice cream in this place. Is that true, or has my intelligence been misinformed?" Emma giggled and grabbed his hand, dragging him toward the kitchen. Daniel watched them go, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. The evening passed in a blur of laughter and storytelling. Michael had always been the entertainer of the family, the one who could turn any gathering into a party. He told Emma ridiculous stories about his own childhood, exaggerating wildly for comedic effect. He helped her with a puzzle she'd been struggling with for weeks. He even let her paint his fingernails, sitting patiently while she applied bright pink polish with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Later, after Emma was asleep, the brothers sat at the kitchen table with beers they had bought from the corner store. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic from the street below. "So," Michael said, setting down his bottle, "tell me everything." Daniel told him. Everything. From the moment Victoria had appeared at his door to the disastrous interview that morning. He didn't hold back, didn't try to minimize or explain away. He just told the truth, raw and unvarnished. When he finished, Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he said, "That's a lot, Danny. More than one person should have to deal with." "I know. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" "Because I'm supposed to have it together." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, feeling the exhaustion of the past week settling into his bones. "I'm the younger one, remember? You're the successful one. The good job, the nice house, the perfect family. I was supposed to figure it out on my own." Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Danny, my perfect family is hanging by a thread. Jenny and I have been fighting for months. The kids are driving us crazy. And I just found out last week that there might be layoffs at my company." He shook his head. "Nobody has it together, man. We're all just pretending." "You never said anything." "Neither did you. I guess we're both idiots." They looked at each other across the table, two brothers who had spent years building walls between themselves, pretending to be stronger than they were. And in that moment, something shifted. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I should have called sooner." "I'm sorry too. I should have pushed harder when I knew something was wrong." Michael reached across the table and gripped Daniel's shoulder. "But we're here now. That's what matters. And tomorrow, we're going to figure out a plan. A real plan. Together." Daniel nodded, feeling hope stir in his chest for the first time in days. "Together," he agreed. "That sounds good." They talked late into the night, working through problems, brainstorming solutions, simply being brothers in a way they hadn't been for years. And when Daniel finally went to bed, exhausted but strangely peaceful, he found himself thinking about Sarah's letter. "It's okay to fall apart," she had written. "It's okay to not have all the answers." She had been right, as usual. Falling apart wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of putting yourself back together. And with Michael's help, with Emma's love, with the memory of Sarah guiding him forward, Daniel was finally ready to start. Michael stayed for 3 days. They spent the first morning at the kitchen table with coffee and notebooks, mapping out Daniel's financial situation in brutal detail. Michael had always been the practical one, the spreadsheet guy, the person who balanced his checkbook to the penny while Daniel rounded everything up and hoped for the best. Now, that practicality felt less like a personality quirk and more like a lifeline. "Okay," Michael said, tapping his pen against the table. "Let's look at what we've got. 3,000 in savings, roughly, unemployment pending, but that could take weeks, rent going up by 200 starting next month." He wrote the numbers in neat columns, his handwriting crisp and precise. "What about other income, side projects? Anything?" Daniel shook his head. "I haven't done freelance work in years, not since everything happened. I didn't have time." "But you could, if you had to." "I guess, maybe. I'd have to find clients, and that takes time." Michael nodded, making another note. "What about cutting expenses? Where can we trim?" They went through Daniel's monthly bills line by line, finding small savings where they could. A streaming service that Daniel hadn't watched in months. A gym membership he'd been paying for since before Emma was born, back when he actually had time to exercise. A subscription to an architecture magazine that mostly just piled up in the corner, unread. By the time they finished, they had found almost $100 in monthly savings. It wasn't much, but it was something. "The real issue," Michael said, setting down his pen, "is finding work. Everything else is just buying time." "I know. What about outside the industry? Have you thought about that?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm an architect, Mike. It's all I know how to do." "That's not true. You know how to design things, how to manage projects, how to communicate with clients. Those are transferable skills. You could work in construction management, or project coordination, or hell, even real estate development if you played your cards right. Those jobs don't pay what architecture pays. Neither does unemployment." The words hung in the air between them, harsh but true. Daniel looked down at the notebook, at the columns of numbers that added up to a reality he didn't want to face. Michael was right. He couldn't afford to be precious about his career right now. He needed income, any income, or he and Emma would be on the street before Christmas. "I'll start looking," Daniel said quietly. "Broader searches, different industries." "Good." Michael's expression softened. "And Danny? You should think about talking to Victoria." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" I know. Hear me out." Michael raised his hands in a placating gesture. "She fired you. She embarrassed you. But she also worked with you for 4 years. She knows your capabilities better than almost anyone. And if she could be convinced to give you a reference, a real reference, not some corporate speak BS, it could make all the difference." "She won't." "You didn't see her face, Mike. She was furious. She felt betrayed." "People calm down. Situations change. It's worth a shot." Daniel thought about Victoria standing in his kitchen, her mascara smeared, her voice cracking with rage and grief. She had lost $50 million because of him. She had lost her company's reputation. Why would she ever agree to help him after that? But Michael had a point. Without a positive reference, Daniel's job search was handicapped from the start. Every potential employer would call Lane Architecture, and every potential employer would hear about the Morrison project, the missed deadline, the epic failure that had defined Daniel's final days at the firm. He needed Victoria, whether he liked it or not. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." Emma emerged from her room around 9, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. She brightened immediately when she saw Michael still at the table. "You're still here!" "Of course I'm still here, Munchkin. You think I'd leave without saying goodbye?" "Uncle Jake did that once. He snuck out in the middle of the night because he didn't want to see Daddy cry." Daniel winced at the memory. His friend Jake had visited a few months after Sarah's funeral, and the experience had been so awkward, so painful, that Jake had apparently decided fleeing was better than facing Daniel's grief head on. They hadn't spoken since. "Well, I'm not Uncle Jake," Michael said firmly, "and I don't run away from things. I face them head on, like a real man." He flexed his arms dramatically, making Emma giggle. "See these muscles? These are the muscles of courage." "You don't have muscles, Uncle Mike. You have spaghetti arms." "Excuse me? Spaghetti arms? I'll have you know these arms can lift a fully grown 8-year-old over my head and spin her around until she screams for mercy." "No, you can't. Want to bet?" What followed was 15 minutes of chaos that left the living room furniture rearranged and both Emma and Michael breathless with laughter. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway, feeling something warm and bright blooming in his chest. This was what he wanted for Emma. This was what she needed. Joy, play, the simple pleasure of being a kid without worrying about rent or jobs or whether her father was falling apart. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe talking to Victoria wasn't such a crazy idea. Not for his sake, but for Emma's. For her future. For the life she deserved. After Michael left on Thursday afternoon, the apartment felt emptier than before. Daniel stood at the window and watched his brother's car disappear around the corner, feeling the loneliness settle back in like an old familiar ache. But something had changed. The despair that had been crushing him for the past week felt lighter somehow, more manageable. He had a plan now, even if it was an imperfect one. He had support, even if it was 2 hours away. He wasn't alone anymore. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and composed an email. He wrote it 3 times, deleting each draft when it didn't feel right. Too apologetic, too desperate, too formal. He needed to strike a balance between humble and professional, between acknowledging his mistake and not completely debasing himself. The final version read, "Victoria, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now, and I understand if you delete this email without reading it, but I wanted to reach out anyway because I owe you more than what I said on Saturday morning. I made a mistake, a serious one. I cost you and the company something that can't be recovered, and I take full responsibility for that. There's nothing I can say that will make it better, and I won't insult you by trying. What I will say is this. Working at Lane Architecture was the best professional experience of my life. I learned more in 4 years with you than in the previous 10 combined, and despite how things ended, I'm grateful for the opportunity you gave me. If there's ever a time when we could talk, not to relitigate the past, but just to clear the air, I would appreciate it. I understand if that time isn't now or ever, but the offer stands. With respect, Daniel Harper." He read it one more time, took a deep breath, and clicked send. The reply came 3 days later. Daniel was in the middle of making lunch when his phone buzzed with an email notification. He almost ignored it. He'd been getting so many rejection notices lately that checking his email had become a form of masochism. But something made him look anyway. Maybe intuition, maybe desperation, maybe just the hope that refused to die no matter how many times it was beaten down. Victoria Lane read the sender line. Subject, from Daniel. His heart stopped. His hands started shaking so badly that he almost dropped the phone. He set it down on the counter and just stared at it for a long moment, afraid to open the message, afraid of what it might say. "Daddy? Is the soup ready?" Emma was sitting at the table, waiting patiently for her tomato soup and grilled cheese, the lunch they made every Sunday because it had been Sarah's favorite. "Almost, sweetheart. Just give me 1 more minute." Daniel picked up the phone and opened the email. "Daniel, I've been thinking about you a lot since Saturday. Not in a good way, if I'm honest. I've been angry. I've been hurt. I've been replaying that morning in my head over and over again, wondering if I handled it wrong, wondering if I could have done something different. But I've also been thinking about what I saw in your apartment, your daughter, sitting at that table, the way she looked at me, the way she looked at you. I think we should talk. Not on the phone. In person. My office, tomorrow at 2 p.m., if you can make it. This isn't a promise of anything. I'm still angry, but I think I owe it to both of us to at least have a conversation. Victoria." Daniel read the email twice, then 3 times, then once more, just to make sure he wasn't imagining things. She wanted to talk. Victoria Lane, the woman who had fired him in front of his daughter, who had screamed at him in his own kitchen, wanted to have a conversation. What did that mean? Was she going to yell at him again? Threaten him with legal action? Or was there something else, something he couldn't see yet, waiting on the other side of that office door? He didn't know. He couldn't know. But he knew one thing for certain. He was going to show up tomorrow at 2 p.m., and he was going to face whatever came next. For Emma. For himself. For the chance to at least try to set things right. The soup boiled over on the stove, and Daniel didn't even notice until Emma pointed it out. But even as he cleaned up the mess, his mind was somewhere else entirely, racing toward tomorrow and all its terrifying possibilities. Monday arrived faster than Daniel was ready for. He spent the morning trying to decide what to wear, which felt absurd given the circumstances. What did you wear to meet with the person who had destroyed your career? A suit seemed too formal, too desperate. Casual clothes seemed disrespectful, like he wasn't taking the situation seriously. He finally settled on khakis and a button-down shirt, the same thing he would have worn to a client meeting in better times. The babysitter arrived at 1:30, a teenage girl from the building named Maya, who occasionally watched Emma when Daniel needed to run errands. He paid her $20, money he couldn't really afford, and tried not to think about the dwindling balance in his checking account. "Thanks for doing this last minute," he said, grabbing his jacket. "No problem, Mr. Harper. Emma and I are going to have fun, right, Emma?" Emma nodded, already distracted by the art supplies Maya had brought. Daniel kissed the top of his daughter's head and headed out the door before his nerves could get the better of him. The drive to Victoria's office took 30 minutes in midday traffic. Daniel spent most of it rehearsing what he wanted to say, practicing different versions of the same basic message. "I'm sorry. I take responsibility. Please don't destroy what's left of my reputation." But every version sounded hollow, insufficient. How did you apologize for costing someone $50 million? What words were adequate for that kind of failure? He parked in the garage beneath the building, the same garage he had used every day for 4 years, until 10 days ago when his life had exploded. The security guard at the desk gave him a sympathetic look, but didn't say anything. Word had clearly gotten around. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt endless. Daniel watched the numbers climb, his palms sweating, his heart pounding. He had been in this building hundreds of times. He had designed presentations in these conference rooms, shared lunches in the break room, celebrated project completions with champagne and cake. Now he was returning as a stranger, an outsider, someone who no longer belonged. The doors opened onto the familiar reception area, all clean lines and modern furniture, the aesthetic Daniel had always admired about Victoria's firm. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, who had started just a few months ago, looked up with wide eyes when she saw him. "Mr. Harper, Miss Lane is expecting you. You can go right in." Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. He walked past the reception desk, past the rows of drafting tables where his former colleagues carefully avoided meeting his eyes, past the glass walls of the conference room where he had made so many presentations. Every step felt like walking through his own history, every familiar sight a reminder of everything he had lost. Victoria's office was at the end of the hall, behind a door that was currently closed. Daniel stopped in front of it and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. His hand was shaking as he raised it to knock. "Come in," Victoria's voice called before his knuckles touched the wood. He opened the door. Victoria was sitting behind her desk, looking nothing like the woman who had appeared at his apartment 10 days ago. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup impeccable, her expression carefully neutral. She was wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, and her posture was so straight it looked almost painful. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Daniel sat. The chair was leather, expensive, designed for comfort. It felt like sitting on a torture device. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Victoria studied him with those sharp blue eyes, cataloging every detail. The dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests of the chair. He felt exposed, transparent, like she could see every failure and fear written across his face. "You look terrible," she said finally. "I know. Have you been sleeping?" "Not much." Victoria nodded slowly, as if this was the answer she had expected. She leaned back in her chair and folded her hands on the desk. "I've been doing some thinking," she said, "about Saturday, about the Morrison project, about you. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know—" She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me finish. You'll have your chance to talk." Daniel closed his mouth and waited. "When I came to your apartment," Victoria continued, "I was operating on pure rage. $50 million, Daniel. That's what we lost. $50 million that took me 18 months to cultivate, that I sacrificed vacations and weekends and my marriage for. Do you know that my husband left me 6 months ago? Did you know that?" Daniel shook his head, stunned. "No, I had no idea." "Nobody did. I didn't tell anyone. I just kept working, kept pushing, kept telling myself that the Morrison project would make it all worth it." Her voice cracked slightly, then steadied. "And then you forgot to send an email." "I didn't forget. I mean, I did, but it wasn't carelessness. My daughter was sick. She had a fever of 103, and she was crying for me, and I had to—" "I know." Victoria's voice was soft now, almost gentle. "I know why you didn't send it. I've known for a few days now." "You have?" "After I left your apartment, after I calmed down enough to think straight, I started asking questions. I talked to your colleagues, your project manager, the IT department. I wanted to understand how this had happened, how someone as talented as you could make such a catastrophic mistake." She paused, her eyes never leaving his face. "Do you know what I found?" Daniel shook his head again, afraid to speak. "I found a man who had been drowning for 3 years. A man whose wife died suddenly, who was left to raise a daughter alone, who threw himself into work because he didn't know any other way to cope. I found a man who came in early and stayed late, who never took sick days, who said yes to every project I threw at him, even when he was clearly overwhelmed." Victoria's voice hardened. "I also found a man whose requests for flexibility were denied at every turn, whose need for remote work options was dismissed as not consistent with company culture, whose struggles were visible to everyone but actively ignored because he was too valuable to lose." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "That's not— I never blamed anyone else for what happened." "You should." "Not entirely. The mistake was yours, and the consequences were severe. But I've been running this company for 6 months, and in that time, I've prided myself on being efficient, demanding, results-oriented. I've never prided myself on being humane." She laughed bitterly. "My ex-husband used to say I cared more about buildings than people. I always told him he was wrong. Turns out he was right." The room fell silent. Outside the window, the city hummed with its usual afternoon noise, cars honking, people talking, the endless mechanical heartbeat of urban life. But inside Victoria's office, it felt like time had stopped. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel asked. Victoria took a deep breath. "Because I've spent the last week looking in a mirror, and I don't like what I see. Because I fired you in front of your daughter, and the look on her face has been haunting me ever since. Because I was so focused on what you cost me that I never stopped to think about what I might have cost you. You gave me a job, a good job, 4 years of work that I'm proud of. And then I took it away in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, in front of the person who matters most to you." Victoria shook her head slowly. "That's not the kind of person I want to be, Daniel. That's not the kind of leader I want to be." Daniel didn't know what to say. This wasn't the conversation he had prepared for. He had expected anger, recrimination, perhaps even threats. Instead, he was getting something that looked almost like vulnerability. "I'm still angry," Victoria said, as if reading his thoughts. "I want you to understand that. What happened with Morrison? That hurt. Professionally, personally, financially. I lost investors. I lost clients. I lost credibility that took years to build. I know. I'm so sorry. But I've also been thinking about what you said in your email, about wanting to clear the air, about gratitude." She fixed him with a look that was hard to read. "Did you mean that? Were you really grateful?" "Yes." Daniel's voice was firm, certain. "Working here was the highlight of my career. I learned things from you that I never would have learned anywhere else. You pushed me to be better, to think bigger, to take risks I never would have taken on my own. Whatever happened at the end, I don't regret a single day of working here." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly something shifted in her expression. The hardness softened. The walls came down, just a little. "You were one of my best designers," she said quietly. "I don't say that to flatter you. I say it because it's true. The Morrison project, the work you did on that was extraordinary. When I looked through those files, I was reminded why I hired you in the first place." "Thank you. That means a lot." "It doesn't change what happened, but it does make me think." She trailed off, seeming to wrestle with something. "What are your plans now? What's next for you?" Daniel laughed, a hollow sound. "Honestly, I don't know. I've been applying to jobs, but word has gotten around about what happened here. Nobody wants to hire the guy who cost his last company $50 million. "I suspected as much." Victoria nodded slowly. "The industry is small. News travels fast. I've been thinking about trying something different. Construction management maybe, or project coordination, something outside architecture." "You'd hate that. You're a designer, Daniel. It's who you are." "I'm also a father, and right now, being a father means finding any job that pays the bills, even if it's not my dream job." Victoria studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. "My father started this company 40 years ago," she said, her back to him. "He built it from nothing, one client, one project at a time. When I took over 6 months ago, I promised myself I would make it bigger, better, more successful than he ever dreamed. I've been so focused on that promise that I forgot why he started the company in the first place." "Why did he start it?" "Because he believed that architecture could change people's lives. Not just in the obvious ways, building hospitals and schools and homes, but in the small ways too. The way a well-designed space makes you feel, the way light falls through a window, the way a building can tell a story about the people who live and work inside it." She turned to face him. "He believed that the work mattered more than the profit. I've been operating as if the profit matters more than the work." Daniel didn't know what to say. This was a side of Victoria he had never seen before, reflective, almost vulnerable. "The Morrison project failing wasn't just about the email," Victoria continued. "It was about a culture I created. A culture that values output over well-being, results over relationships. If I had been paying attention, really paying attention, I would have seen that you were struggling. I would have helped you before things got this bad. That's not your responsibility. I'm an adult. I should have asked for help. And I should have created an environment where asking for help felt possible." Victoria walked back to her desk and sat down heavily. "We both failed, Daniel, in different ways, for different reasons, but we both failed." The room fell silent again. Daniel could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere, counting off seconds that felt like hours. "So what happens now?" he asked finally. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since he had walked through her door, he saw something like hope in her eyes. "Now," she said slowly, "we figure out if there's a way to move forward. Not backward. We can't undo what happened, but forward. Together." "What do you mean?" Victoria opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a folder. She slid it across to him, her expression serious. "I'm not going to pretend that I can give you your old job back. The damage to our reputation, the loss of the Morrison account, I can't ignore that. My investors wouldn't stand for it, and frankly, neither would I." Daniel's heart sank. He had allowed himself to hope, just for a moment, that this conversation might end differently. "But," Victoria continued, "I've been thinking about what you said about flexibility, about needing to be there for your daughter. And I've been thinking about the fact that despite everything, you're still one of the most talented architects I've ever worked with." She tapped the folder. "Open it." Daniel reached out and pulled the folder toward him. His hands were trembling slightly as he lifted the cover. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A contract. Daniel scanned the text, his eyes widening with each line. "This is a consulting agreement. Part-time, remote work. Design projects only. No client management, no meetings, no deadlines that require you to be in the office at specific times. You would work from home, set your own hours, deliver when you're able to deliver." Daniel looked up at her, stunned. Why? After everything I cost you, why would you offer me this? Victoria leaned forward, her eyes intense. Because I believe in second chances. Because I believe that people are more than their worst moments. And because I believe that if we had done things differently, if I had done things differently, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. Victoria, I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Read the contract, talk to whoever you need to talk to, and let me know by the end of the week. She paused. And Daniel? This isn't charity. The pay isn't what you were making before, and the work will be demanding, but it's real work, meaningful work, the kind of work you became an architect to do. Daniel looked down at the contract, at the numbers and terms that represented a lifeline he hadn't dared to hope for. It wasn't a return to his old life. It wasn't a restoration of everything he had lost, but it was something. A beginning. A chance. I don't need until the end of the week, he said quietly. Victoria raised an eyebrow. No? No. Daniel closed the folder and met her eyes. I accept. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm in. For the first time since he had walked through her door, Victoria smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and uncertain, but it transformed her face entirely. She looked younger suddenly, softer, more human. Good, she said. Then we have work to do. They talked for another hour after that, working out the details of the arrangement. Daniel would start next week, working on a small residential project that Victoria had been struggling to staff. The pay was modest, about a third of what he had been making before. But it was enough to cover rent, especially with the expenses he and Michael had trimmed. More importantly, it was work he could do from home. Work that wouldn't require him to choose between being an architect and being a father. When he finally stood to leave, the afternoon sun was slanting through Victoria's office windows, casting long golden shadows across the floor. He paused at the door, turning back to look at her. Thank you, he said. I know that doesn't begin to cover it, but thank you. Victoria nodded slowly. Don't thank me yet. The work will be hard, and I'll expect excellence. This isn't a vacation, Daniel. It's a second chance. Don't waste it. I won't, I promise. He walked out of the office, past his former colleagues who were now looking at him with curiosity instead of pity, past Chloe at the reception desk who gave him a small wave, past the glass conference room where he had failed so spectacularly 10 days ago. The elevator doors opened and he stepped inside, pressing the button for the parking garage. As the car descended, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished metal walls. He still looked tired. He still looked worn down. But there was something else there now, something that hadn't been there that morning. Hope. Real, genuine hope. The elevator reached the garage and Daniel walked to his car with steps that felt lighter than they had in weeks. He had a job. A real job. Doing real work. For a boss who had somehow found a way to forgive him. It wasn't the ending he had expected. It wasn't even close. But maybe that was okay. Maybe endings were just beginnings in disguise. He got into his car and pulled out of the garage into the golden afternoon light of a city that suddenly felt full of possibility. And as he drove toward home, toward Emma, toward the future he was only beginning to imagine, Daniel Harper allowed himself to believe that everything might actually be okay. Not because the problems were solved. They weren't. There were still bills to pay, still wounds to heal, still 1,000 small challenges waiting just around the corner. But because he wasn't facing them alone anymore, because someone had looked at his worst failure and seen something worth saving, because even in the darkest moments, there was always the possibility of light. And that, Daniel was learning, was enough. The drive home took longer than it should have. Traffic was heavy, the result of some accident on the main highway that had everyone rerouting through surface streets. But Daniel didn't mind. He needed the time to think, to process everything that had happened in Victoria's office. A job. A real job. Not the job he'd had before, not the career he'd spent a decade building, but something. A foothold. A place to stand while he figured out the rest. His phone buzzed as he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building. A text from Michael. Well, how did it go? Don't leave me hanging here. Daniel smiled as he typed back his response. Better than I could have imagined. I'll call you tonight and explain everything. The reply came immediately. You better. I've been stress-eating cookies all afternoon waiting to hear from you. Daniel laughed out loud, a sound that felt foreign after the past week. When was the last time he had laughed like that? Genuinely, freely, without the weight of the world pressing down on him? He got out of the car and walked to his apartment, taking the stairs instead of the elevator because he had too much energy to stand still. Maya was waiting in the living room when he arrived, Emma curled up beside her on the couch, watching something colorful on the television. "Daddy!" Emma launched herself off the couch and into his arms, nearly knocking him over with the force of her enthusiasm. "You're back." "I'm back, sweetheart. Did you have fun with Maya?" "We made cookies, and I painted a picture, and Maya let me stay up past quiet time because I wasn't tired." Daniel looked at Maya, who shrugged apologetically. She was very persuasive. She usually is. Daniel set Emma down and dug out his wallet, counting out the $20 he owed. "Thanks again for watching her. I really appreciate it." "No problem, Mr. Harper. Anytime." After Maya left, Daniel sat down on the couch with Emma and listened as she told him about her afternoon in exhaustive detail. The cookies were chocolate chip. The picture was of a butterfly. Maya's phone had a game on it where you could dress up cats in different outfits. He listened to every word, really listened, in a way he hadn't been able to for weeks. The anxiety that had been sitting on his chest like a stone had finally lifted, replaced by something lighter, warmer. "Daddy," Emma said, interrupting her own story about the cat game. "You look different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Happier, I guess." She studied him with those big, serious eyes. "Did something good happen?" Daniel smiled and pulled her close. "Yeah, sweetheart. Something good happened." "What?" "I got a job, a new job, working from home so I can be here more." Emma's face lit up. "You'll be here when I get home from school?" "Most days, yes." "And we can have snacks together?" "Absolutely." "And you can help me with my homework?" "That's the plan." Emma threw her arms around his neck and squeezed tight. "This is the best news ever." Daniel hugged her back, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. This was what mattered. This was what all of it had been for. Not the career, not the money, not the reputation he had spent years building. This, his daughter, his family. Everything else was just details. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and called Michael. He talked for over an hour, explaining everything that had happened in Victoria's office. The conversation, the contract, the unexpected second chance that had appeared out of nowhere. Michael listened without interrupting, asking questions only when Daniel paused for breath. When the story was finally done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Wow," Michael said finally. "That's... wow." "I know, I still can't quite believe it. So you're really going to work from home, design stuff remotely?" "That's the plan. The pay isn't great, but it's enough. And more importantly, I'll be here for Emma. Really here, not just physically present, but mentally checked out like I was before." "Danny, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you." "Thanks, Mike. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Coming down here, helping me get my head on straight, it made all the difference." "That's what brothers are for." Michael's voice was warm. "And hey, maybe now that you're not drowning in work all the time, you can actually come visit us. The kids keep asking about their Uncle Danny. They've got this idea that you're some kind of superhero who lives in a secret fortress." Daniel laughed. "A secret fortress? My apartment is about 500 square feet. Small fortress. Compact superhero lair. I'll take it." They talked for a few more minutes before Michael had to go. Something about his wife needing help with the kids' bedtime routine. Daniel hung up and sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the walls that had felt like a prison just a few days ago. Same walls, same apartment, same life, in all the ways that mattered, but different. Somehow, impossibly, different. He thought about Sarah's letter, still folded carefully in the box in the hallway closet. "It's okay to fall apart," she had written. "It's okay to be scared." He had fallen apart, he had been scared, and somehow, on the other side of that falling apart, he had found something new. Not the life he had planned, not the future he had imagined, but something real, Something sustainable. Something that might actually work. Daniel stood up and walked to Emma's room, standing in the doorway the way he did every night, watching her sleep. Her face was peaceful in the glow of the nightlight, her chest rising and falling with each slow breath. Mr. Flops was tucked under her arm, as always. "I'm going to make this work," he whispered to her sleeping form. "For you, for us, for everything we're going to build together." She didn't stir. She didn't need to. The promise wasn't for her to hear. It was for him to keep. Daniel pulled her door closed halfway and walked to his own room. For the first time in weeks, he fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow. The first month of Daniel's new arrangement passed in a blur of adjustments and small victories. Working from home was nothing like he had imagined. The freedom was intoxicating at first. No commute, no office politics, no rushing out the door at dawn while Emma was still rubbing sleep from her eyes. He could make breakfast for her every morning now, real breakfast. Not the grab-and-go cereal bars that had become their sad routine in the months before his firing. He could walk her to the school bus stop and be there waiting when she got off in the afternoon. But the freedom came with its own challenges. The apartment was small, and finding a dedicated workspace proved nearly impossible. Daniel tried setting up at the kitchen table, but Emma's toys kept migrating onto his papers. He tried working from the couch, but the television was too tempting and his back started aching after a few hours. Finally, he carved out a corner of his bedroom, setting up a folding table and a second-hand office chair he found at a thrift store for $15. It wasn't much. It wasn't anything close to the sleek, modern workspace he'd had at Victoria's firm. But it was his, and that made all the difference. The first project Victoria assigned him was a small residential renovation, a young couple in the suburbs who wanted to transform their outdated kitchen into something modern and functional. It was simple work, the kind of project that would have been handed to a junior designer in his old life. But Daniel threw himself into it with an enthusiasm that surprised even him. He spent hours sketching different layouts, experimenting with cabinet configurations and lighting placements. He researched countertop materials and flooring options until he knew more about quartzite versus granite than he ever thought possible. When he finally submitted his designs to Victoria, he did so with a mixture of pride and anxiety that reminded him of his earliest days in the industry, back when every project felt like a test he might fail. Victoria's response came the next morning, a brief email that made Daniel's heart stop when he saw the notification. "These are excellent. The clients are going to love them. Well done." 8 words. That was all. But Daniel read them over and over again, letting each one sink in like water into dry soil. Excellent. Well done. Words he hadn't heard in so long that he'd forgotten how much they mattered. He forwarded the email to Michael, adding only a single exclamation point. His brother's response was immediate, a string of celebration emojis followed by, "I knew it. I knew you still had it." Daniel laughed out loud, startling Emma, who was doing her homework at the kitchen table. "What's so funny, Daddy?" "Nothing, sweetheart, just your Uncle Mike being silly." "He's always silly." "That's true. It's one of his best qualities." The second month brought more projects, each one slightly larger and more complex than the last. Victoria was testing him, Daniel realized, gradually increasing the difficulty to see how he would handle the pressure. But it wasn't the crushing, relentless pressure of his old job. It was measured, manageable, designed to challenge without overwhelming, and Daniel rose to meet it. He found a rhythm that worked for both him and Emma. Mornings were for breakfast and school preparation, that sacred time when he could focus entirely on his daughter without the nagging guilt of work waiting to be done. Once Emma was on the bus, he would retreat to his corner workspace and lose himself in designs for 3 or 4 hours. Afternoons were split between more work and quality time, helping with homework, playing in the park, cooking dinner together instead of ordering takeout. The financial pressure eased slightly as well. His first paycheck from Victoria arrived on the 15th of November, a deposit that wasn't much by his old standards, but felt like a fortune after weeks of watching his savings dwindle. He paid the rent, caught up on the electric bill, and still had enough left over to take Emma out for ice cream as a celebration. "Are we rich now?" Emma asked, licking a strawberry cone with rainbow sprinkles. Daniel laughed. "Not even close, sweetheart, but we're doing okay. That's what matters." "Okay is good." "Okay is very good." By the end of November, Daniel had completed 4 projects and was in the middle of a 5th, a more ambitious renovation of a downtown loft that required all of his creative skills. The clients were demanding, the timeline was tight, and there were moments when he felt the old panic rising in his chest, that familiar sensation of being in over his head. But something had changed. When the panic came now, he knew what to do with it. He would step away from his desk, take a few deep breaths, maybe walk around the block if Emma was at school. He would remind himself that one project, no matter how difficult, was not worth sacrificing his health or his relationship with his daughter. And then he would go back to work, calmer, more focused, more capable of handling whatever challenges awaited. Victoria noticed the change. She mentioned it during one of their weekly check-in calls, her voice carrying a warmth that still surprised Daniel every time he heard it. "You seem different," she said, more centered, less frantic. "I feel different," Daniel admitted. "I feel like I can finally breathe." "Good. That's what I was hoping for." There was a pause on the line. "Daniel, I want you to know that I'm impressed with your work. Not just the quality, which has always been excellent, but the consistency. You're hitting every deadline, exceeding expectations, doing things that I wasn't sure were possible for someone in your situation. Thank you. That means a lot. I'm not saying it to flatter you. I'm saying it because I've been thinking about your future with the company, and I wanted to give you a heads up." Daniel's heart rate quickened. "What kind of heads up?" "Nothing bad," Victoria assured him. "Just the opposite, actually. We have a project coming up in January, a significant one. A new restaurant downtown from the ground up. The client specifically asked for your involvement after seeing your work on the Thompson loft." "They asked for me?" "By name. They said your designs had soul, which isn't a word I hear often in this industry." Victoria paused again. "I'm not going to lie, Daniel. This would be a big step up from what you've been doing. More responsibility, more visibility, more pressure. But I think you're ready for it." Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing the information. A restaurant. A real building, not just renovations and redesigns. The kind of project he used to dream about back when dreams still felt possible. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take the weekend." "But Daniel, I hope you say yes. This could be a turning point for your career." They ended the call, and Daniel sat at his makeshift desk for a long time, staring at the wall without really seeing it. A turning point. Just a few months ago, he had been convinced that his career was over. Now Victoria was offering him opportunities that exceeded anything he had expected. How had this happened? How had his worst failure led to something that felt almost like success? He thought about the morning Victoria had shown up at his door, screaming about the Morrison project. He thought about the terror in Emma's eyes, the shame that had burned through his chest, the absolute certainty that his life was over. If someone had told him then that this moment was coming, that he would be working from home, thriving professionally, being offered bigger and better projects, he would have laughed in their face. But here he was. Against all odds, here he was. Daniel picked up his phone and texted Michael, "Victoria just offered me a major project. Restaurant design. Client asked for me by name." The response came within seconds. "BRO, that's amazing. Are you going to say yes?" "I think so, but I'm scared." "Good. Fear means it matters. Say yes anyway." Daniel smiled at his phone. His brother had a gift for cutting through complexity and finding the simple truth underneath. Fear means it matters. Say yes anyway. He would say yes. He knew that now, even though he hadn't fully admitted it to himself yet. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to prove that his redemption wasn't just a fluke. He wasn't going to let fear stop him. Not anymore. The holiday season arrived with its usual chaos, but this year it felt different. Better. Daniel put up a small Christmas tree in the corner of the living room, a tradition they had abandoned in the years since Sarah's death because it had been too painful, too full of memories. But Emma was 9 now, old enough to start creating new traditions, and she had begged him for weeks until he finally relented. They decorated the tree together on a Sunday afternoon, hanging ornaments that Daniel had kept in storage, some from his own childhood, some that he and Sarah had collected over the years, some that Emma had made in preschool and kindergarten. Each one carried a story, a memory, a tiny piece of their family history. "Daddy, look at this one," Emma held up a clay handprint, painted gold and covered in glitter. I made this when I was 4. Do you remember? Daniel did remember. Sarah had helped her with it, guiding her small hand into the clay, laughing as Emma got more paint on herself than on the ornament. It had been one of the last Christmases before the accident, one of the last happy, uncomplicated times. I remember, sweetheart. Mommy was so proud of you. Emma studied the handprint, her expression thoughtful. My hand was so small. You were small. You've grown a lot since then. Will I keep growing forever? Not forever, but for a while yet. And even when you stop growing taller, you'll keep growing in other ways. Smarter, kinder, more capable. That kind of growing never stops. Emma seemed to accept this. She hung the handprint on the tree, placing it carefully near the top where it would catch the light. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart? I think Mommy would like our tree. Daniel felt his throat tighten. I think so too, baby. I think she'd like it a lot. Christmas Day itself was quiet, but happy. Daniel had saved enough money to buy Emma the art supplies she'd been asking for. New colored pencils, a sketchbook, a beginner's watercolor set. She spent most of the day creating pictures at the kitchen table while Daniel worked on his presentation for the restaurant project, which Victoria had officially offered him and which he had officially accepted. In the afternoon, they video called Michael and his family. The cousins showed off their presents while the adults caught up on news and gossip. Jenny, Michael's wife, seemed warmer than she had been the last time Daniel had spoken to her, and he wondered if whatever had been causing tension between her and Michael had finally resolved itself. You look good, Danny, Michael said toward the end of the call. I mean it. You look like yourself again. I feel like myself again, for the first time in years. I'm glad. You deserve it. After the call ended, Daniel sat on the couch with Emma, watching a holiday movie while the winter darkness settled over the city outside. The tree lights twinkled in the corner, casting colored shadows across the walls. Mr. Flops was wedged between them, as always, his button eyes reflecting the glow of the screen. Daddy? Emma said, not taking her eyes off the movie. Yes? This is the best Christmas ever. Daniel pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. I think so too, sweetheart. I think so too. January arrived cold and sharp, bringing with it the restaurant project and all the challenges Daniel had anticipated. The clients, a married couple named Marcus and Diane, who had made their fortune in tech, were passionate about their vision but unclear about the details. They wanted something modern but warm, minimalist but inviting, sophisticated but accessible. Translating these contradictory desires into an actual design required all of Daniel's skill and patience. He threw himself into the work with an intensity that reminded him of his early days in architecture, back when every project felt like an adventure. He sketched dozens of concepts, discarding most of them before arriving at something that felt right. He researched restaurant design until he could speak intelligently about kitchen workflows and seating configurations, and the psychology of ambient lighting. He had long phone calls with Marcus and Diane, teasing out their preferences, helping them articulate what they couldn't quite put into words. Victoria monitored his progress with a mixture of hands-off trust and gentle guidance. She had learned, over the months of working together, that Daniel operated best when given space to think. But she was also quick to step in when he needed direction, offering suggestions that cut through his occasional confusion and pointed him toward solutions. The layout is strong, she told him during one of their calls, reviewing his latest iteration, but the entrance feels closed off. Can you open it up somehow? I was thinking about that. What if I moved the host stand and added a window wall, something that draws people in from the street? Show me. Daniel sketched the changes while Victoria waited, then sent her the updated design. There was a pause, and then her voice came back warm with approval. Yes, that's it exactly. This is going to be beautiful, Daniel. By mid-February, the design was finalized and approved. Marcus and Diane were thrilled, calling Daniel personally to express their gratitude. You understood us, Diane said, her voice full of emotion. I don't know how you did it, but you understood exactly what we were trying to create. That's very kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's truth. You're an artist, Daniel, not just an architect. An artist. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that. He had never thought of himself as an artist, just as someone who liked making things that worked. But the compliment settled into him, warm and affirming, a reminder that his work had value beyond the technical. "Thank you," he said finally. "That means more than you know." After the call, he sat at his desk and looked around his small apartment, the makeshift workspace in the corner of his bedroom, the art supplies scattered across the kitchen table, the Christmas tree that they still hadn't taken down because Emma kept insisting it made the room feel happier. It wasn't much. It wasn't the life he had planned. But it was a good life full of small joys and meaningful work, and a daughter who loved him unconditionally. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it was more than enough. The phone call came on a Thursday evening in late February. Daniel was washing dishes after dinner, Emma doing her homework at the kitchen table, when his phone buzzed with Victoria's name on the screen. This was unusual. Their calls were typically scheduled, not spontaneous, and Daniel felt a flutter of anxiety as he dried his hands and answered. "Victoria, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine." Her voice was calm, even warm. "I'm sorry to call unexpectedly. Do you have a minute?" "Of course, let me just—" He looked at Emma, who was watching him with curious eyes. "Sweetheart, can you work on your homework for a few minutes while Daddy takes a call?" "Is it the nice lady from your work?" Daniel blinked. "The nice lady?" "The one who was mean before but isn't mean anymore. You talk about her sometimes." Daniel laughed despite himself. "Yes, that's the one. I'll be right back." He stepped into his bedroom and closed the door, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Sorry about that. What's going on?" "I wanted to talk to you about something," Victoria said. "Something that's been on my mind for a while." "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least I hope it's not." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Daniel, these past few months, working with you, I've noticed some things. Changes in how I see you. Changes in how I see myself." Daniel's heart began to beat faster. "What kind of changes?" "When I first hired you 4 years ago, I thought of you as an asset, a resource, someone who could produce excellent work and help me build my company. And you did. You exceeded every expectation I had." Another pause. "But I never saw you as a person, not really. You were a tool, a means to an end. I'm not proud of that." "Victoria, let me finish, please." She took a breath. "When I fired you, when I showed up at your apartment that morning, I thought I was just removing a liability, cutting my losses. But then I saw your daughter, and I saw your home, and I saw the way you looked at both of them. And something shifted in me." Daniel was quiet, afraid to speak, afraid to break whatever spell had descended over this conversation. "I started to see you differently after that," Victoria continued. "Not as an asset or a liability, but as a human being with a complicated life and impossible choices. And the more I saw you that way, the more I realized that I had failed you. Not just as a boss, but as a person. You didn't fail me. I failed you. The Morrison Project. The Morrison Project was a symptom, not a cause. The cause was a culture that valued output over humanity. A culture that I created." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "I've spent my whole career building things. Buildings, companies, reputations. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to build relationships, how to see people for who they really are." "Victoria, why are you telling me this?" There was a long silence. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. "Because I want to see you. Not on a video call, not in an email, not as a consultant at the other end of a phone line. I want to see you in person. I want to have dinner with you." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Dinner? Not as your boss, not as your employer, as—" She trailed off, seemingly searching for the right word. As a woman who has realized, much later than she should have, that work isn't the only thing that matters. The room seemed to spin around Daniel. He gripped the edge of the bed, trying to steady himself, trying to process what was happening. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now. I know this is unexpected. I know it's probably inappropriate. If you want to pretend this conversation never happened, I'll understand. But I couldn't go another day without being honest with you." Daniel closed his eyes, letting her words settle over him. Victoria Lane, his former boss, The woman who had fired him in front of his daughter. The woman who had given him a second chance. The woman who was now asking him to dinner. It was insane. It was complicated. It was potentially disastrous. But when he searched his heart, really searched it, he found that he wanted to say yes. When? He asked. What? When do you want to have dinner? Victoria laughed, a sound of pure relief. Whenever you're free. This weekend? Saturday? Saturday works, but Victoria, I need you to understand something. What? I have a daughter. She comes first, always. If this, whatever this is, if it can't coexist with that, then it can't happen at all. I know. Victoria's voice was firm. I wouldn't have it any other way. Emma is the best part of you, Daniel. I saw that the morning I walked into your apartment. Any future worth having includes her. Daniel felt something unlock in his chest, some final barrier that had been holding him back. Saturday, he said. I'll see you Saturday. Saturday, Victoria repeated. I can't wait. They said goodbye and hung up, and Daniel sat on his bed for a long time, staring at the phone in his hand. Outside, the winter evening was settling into darkness. In the kitchen, he could hear Emma humming to herself as she worked on her homework. His daughter, his work, his life. And now, possibly, something else. Something he hadn't expected. Something he hadn't dared to hope for. He stood up and walked back to the kitchen, where Emma was just finishing the last problem in her math worksheet. All done? He asked. All done. Can we watch a movie? Sure, sweetheart, but first I want to tell you something. Emma looked up at him with those big, serious eyes. Sarah's eyes. Always Sarah's eyes. What? Daniel sat down across from her, taking her small hands in his. Do you remember the lady I was talking to on the phone? The one from my work? The nice, mean lady? That's the one. Daniel took a deep breath. Well, she wants to have dinner with me. This weekend. Just the two of us. Emma's brow furrowed. Like a date? Sort of. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. Do you like her? The question was so simple, so direct. Children had a way of cutting through all the complexity and asking the only question that really mattered. I think I might, Daniel said honestly. But I wanted to talk to you first because you're the most important person in my life, and nothing is going to change that, ever. Emma was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said, Mommy would want you to be happy. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. You think so? I know so. She loved you. She'd want someone to take care of you when I'm not around. You take care of me plenty. I know, but I'm just a kid. I can't take care of you forever. Daniel laughed, a wet, broken sound. When did you get so wise? Mrs. Patterson says I'm an old soul. I think that means I know stuff. I think you're right. Emma squeezed his hands. Go on your date, Daddy. I'll be okay. Are you sure? I'm sure. But you have to tell me everything when you get home. I want to know if she's nice for real or just pretending. Daniel leaned across the table and kissed his daughter's forehead. I'll tell you everything, I promise. Good. Now can we watch the movie? Yes, sweetheart. Now we can watch the movie. They settled onto the couch together, Emma curled against his side, Mr. Flops wedged between them. The movie started, something animated and colorful that Daniel didn't pay much attention to. His mind was elsewhere, racing ahead to Saturday, to dinner with Victoria, to whatever came next. He didn't know what would happen. He didn't know if this was the beginning of something real or just a momentary connection that would fade with time. But for the first time in years, for the first time since Sarah, he felt the stirring of possibility. Hope. Real, genuine hope. Not just for his career or his finances or his ability to provide for Emma, but for himself. For his heart. For the part of him that had been frozen since the accident, the part he had been afraid to thaw. The movie played on, the characters going through their colorful adventures, the story building toward its inevitable happy ending. But Daniel barely noticed. He was already somewhere else, somewhere new, somewhere that felt a lot like the future. The rest of the week passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Daniel found himself distracted during work, making small mistakes he had to go back and correct. He changed his outfit for Saturday 3 times, finally settling on a simple blue sweater that Emma declared made him look handsome but not too fancy. "You want to look like yourself," she advised, with the confidence of someone who had watched many romantic comedies. "Not like you're trying too hard. When did you become a fashion consultant?" "I learned from watching you do everything wrong for years." Daniel laughed and messed up her hair, which made her shriek and run away to fix it. Saturday arrived gray and cold, with a threat of snow that never quite materialized. Maya came to babysit at 6, armed with board games and the promise of popcorn. Emma hugged Daniel extra tight before he left, whispering in his ear, "Be brave, Daddy." "I'll try, sweetheart. And remember to ask her questions. Madison says boys are bad at asking questions." "I'll keep that in mind." The restaurant Victoria had chosen was small and elegant, the kind of place with candles on every table and a menu that didn't list prices. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early and spent most of that time trying to slow his racing heart. This was crazy. This was absolutely crazy. He was about to have dinner with his former boss, the woman who had fired him, the woman who had screamed at him in his own kitchen. How had his life taken this turn? But then Victoria walked in, and everything else faded away. She looked different than she did in their video calls, softer somehow, less armored. Her hair was down, falling in waves around her shoulders. She was wearing a deep green dress that brought out the blue of her eyes. When she spotted him, she smiled, and something in Daniel's chest expanded. "You came," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure. I've been telling myself all week that you were going to cancel." "I thought about it," Daniel admitted, "about 100 times, but Emma told me to be brave." "She sounds like a wise girl." "She is. She gets it from her mother." They ordered wine and appetizers, talking easily about work at first, the restaurant project, the upcoming spring season, various industry gossip. It felt safe, familiar, like the professional conversations they'd been having for months. But gradually, the conversation shifted. Deeper. More personal. Victoria told him about her childhood, growing up as the daughter of a man who built an empire and expected her to maintain it. She told him about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to never show weakness, to always keep moving forward no matter what. She told him about her failed marriage, about coming home to an empty house night after night, about the moment she realized she had sacrificed everything personal for professional success. "I was so afraid of being vulnerable," she said, swirling her wine. "I thought vulnerability was weakness. I thought if I let anyone see the real me, they would use it against me." "What changed?" "You did." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening in the candlelight. "That morning in your apartment when you accepted my anger with dignity instead of fighting back. When you told me your daughter came first and you meant it. I realized that I'd been wrong about strength. Real strength isn't armor, it's honesty." Daniel thought about all the times he'd felt weak over the past few years, the sleepless nights, the tears, the moments when he'd been certain he couldn't go on. "I've spent 3 years feeling like a failure," he said quietly, "like I wasn't strong enough to handle what life threw at me. And now? Now I think maybe strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, about asking for help when you need it, about being honest with the people you care about." Victoria reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, her grip gentle but firm. "I want to get to know you, Daniel, the real you, not the architect or the employee or the professional, the man, the father, the person behind all those roles. That person is kind of a mess. Good. I'm tired of people who have it all figured out." She smiled. "Messy is human. Human is real." They talked until the restaurant began emptying, until the waiters started giving them pointed looks. Daniel paid the check. Victoria tried to argue, but he insisted, and they walked out into the cold February night together. "This was nice," Victoria said, pulling her coat tighter. "Better than nice. I don't remember the last time I had a conversation like that." "Neither do I." They stood on the sidewalk, neither quite willing to end the evening. The city hummed around them, but it felt distant, irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was this moment, this connection, this fragile new thing growing between them. "Can we do this again?" Victoria asked. "Soon?" "I'd like that." "Good." She stepped closer, and for a heart-stopping moment, Daniel thought she was going to kiss him. But instead she reached up and straightened his collar, a gesture so tender it almost undid him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for giving me one first." Victoria smiled, and then she was walking away, disappearing into the night. Daniel watched her go, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in the universe. The drive home was quiet, meditative. Daniel replayed the evening in his head, cataloging every moment, every word, every look that had passed between them. By the time he pulled into his parking spot, he was grinning like a teenager after a first date. Maya was asleep on the couch when he walked in, and Emma was supposed to be in bed but was clearly awake judging by the light under her door. Daniel paid Maya, walked her to the door, and then went to check on his daughter. Emma was sitting up in bed, Mr. Flops in her lap, her expression eager. "Well?" she demanded. "How was it?" Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, still smiling. "It was good, sweetheart, really good." "Did you ask her questions?" "I did, lots of them." "Did she ask you questions too?" "She did." "Then it was a good date." Emma nodded sagely. "Madison says the best dates are when both people ask questions." "Madison sounds very smart." "She is. She's going to be a love doctor when she grows up." Daniel laughed. "A love doctor?" "That's what she calls it. Someone who helps people find love." Emma tilted her head. "Do you like her, Daddy? The nice, mean lady?" Daniel thought about the question, really thought about it. Did he like Victoria? The answer, he realized, was more complicated than a simple yes or no. "I think I might," he said finally. "But we're still getting to know each other. It's like making a new friend. You have to spend time together before you really know. Are you going to spend more time together?" "I hope so." Emma smiled, and in that smile Daniel saw everything he needed to know. His daughter was okay with this. His daughter was happy for him. His daughter, who had lost so much, was ready to open her heart to the possibility of something new. "Good," she said. "You deserve someone who makes you smile." Daniel leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep, sweetheart. We have pancakes to make in the morning." "With blueberries?" "Extra blueberries." "Promise?" "Promise." He turned off her light and closed the door halfway, then stood in the hallway for a long moment, just breathing. The apartment was quiet. The night was peaceful. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Harper felt like his life was moving in the right direction. Not because the problems were solved, not because everything was perfect, but because he had hope, real, genuine hope, for himself, for Emma, for whatever came next. And that, he was learning, was the most powerful thing in the world. Spring arrived slowly that year, creeping into the city like a shy guest unsure of its welcome. The trees along Daniel Street began showing the first hints of green, tiny buds pushing through bare branches with stubborn determination. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and with each passing week Daniel felt something inside himself unfurling too, reaching toward the light after years of winter. The restaurant project was nearly complete. Marcus and Diane had approved the final designs, and construction was scheduled to begin in early April. Victoria had called to deliver the news personally, her voice warm with pride. "They're calling it the Harper design," she told him. "Did you know that? They want your name attached to it." Daniel had been sitting at his kitchen table when he got the call, watching Emma draw at her usual spot across from him. The news made him set down his coffee cup, afraid he might spill it. "My name?" "Your name. They said it wouldn't feel right calling it anything else. The restaurant is yours, Daniel. Your vision, your creation, they want the world to know that." He didn't know what to say. For so long, he had felt invisible, like his work disappeared into the ether the moment it was finished. To have clients want to put his name on something, to claim it publicly as his creation, it was more than he had dared to hope for. "I don't know how to thank you," he said finally. "You don't need to thank me. You did the work. I just gave you the opportunity." That's more than most people would have done, after everything that happened. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Giving you that opportunity was one of the best decisions I've ever made, not just professionally, personally. You've reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. You've reminded me that work can be about more than profit and prestige. Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. Victoria. I know I'm being sentimental, very unprofessional of me. She laughed, a sound he had grown to love over the past months. But it's true, and I wanted you to know. They talked for a few more minutes before Victoria had to go. Some meeting she couldn't miss, some crisis that needed her attention. But after she hung up, Daniel sat at the table for a long time, turning her words over in his mind. She had changed. They both had. The Victoria who had screamed at him in his kitchen 6 months ago was not the Victoria who called him now with warmth in her voice and kindness in her heart. And the Daniel who had crumbled under the weight of that firing was not the Daniel who sat here now, steady and hopeful and ready for whatever came next. People could change. Circumstances could change. The future was not written in stone. It was fluid, malleable, shaped by the choices you made and the grace you extended to others. It was a lesson Daniel was still learning, but he was getting better at it every day. The second date happened 2 weeks after the first, and the third followed a week after that. By the time April arrived, Daniel and Victoria had fallen into a rhythm. Dinner on Saturdays, phone calls during the week, the occasional lunch when their schedules aligned. Emma was curious about this new person in her father's life, asking questions with the directness that only children possess. Is she your girlfriend now? I'm not sure yet, sweetheart. We're still figuring things out. But you like her. I do. And she likes you? I think so. Emma nodded, satisfied. Then she's your girlfriend. That's how it works. Daniel laughed. I'll let her know you've made it official. The first time Victoria came to the apartment was in mid-April, on a Sunday afternoon when the spring sunshine was too beautiful to ignore. Daniel had been nervous all morning, cleaning spaces that didn't need cleaning, rearranging furniture that was fine where it was. Emma watched his frantic preparations with amusement. Daddy, you're being weird. I'm not being weird. I'm being thorough. You cleaned the bathroom 3 times. It's an important room. You're weird. She was probably right, but Daniel couldn't help himself. This was the first time Victoria would see his home since that terrible morning 6 months ago, the morning that had ended one chapter of his life and begun another. He wanted her to see how far he'd come. He wanted her to see that the chaos she had witnessed was not the whole story. Victoria arrived at 2 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and a small gift bag. For Emma, she said, handing Daniel the bag. I didn't want to come empty-handed. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. She looked past him into the apartment, taking in the small living room, the kitchen where everything had fallen apart, the modest decorations that made it a home. It looks different than I remember. Good different or bad different? Good different, warmer. She smiled. It feels like you. Emma appeared from her room, hovering in the doorway with uncharacteristic shyness. She was wearing her favorite dress, purple with white polka dots, and had insisted on doing her own hair, which resulted in a slightly lopsided ponytail that Daniel found adorable. Emma, this is Victoria. Victoria, this is my daughter. Victoria crouched down to Emma's level, her expression open and warm. Hi, Emma. It's wonderful to finally meet you properly. You were mean to my daddy, Emma said, with the brutal honesty that children specialize in. Daniel felt his face flush. Emma? But Victoria held up a hand. No, she's right. I was mean to your daddy. I was very mean, and I'm sorry. I was angry about something that happened at work, and I took it out on him in a way that wasn't fair. Emma studied her for a long moment, weighing this response. Are you still mean? I'm trying not to be. Sometimes I still make mistakes, but I'm working on it. That's what Daddy says too, that everyone makes mistakes, but trying is what matters. Your daddy is a wise man. Emma seemed to consider this. Then, apparently reaching some internal decision, she stepped forward and took Victoria's hand. Do you want to see my room? I have drawings. Daddy says I'm going to be an artist. Victoria looked up at Daniel, a question in her eyes. He nodded, and she allowed Emma to lead her down the hallway, disappearing into the room that had become his daughter's creative sanctuary. Daniel stood alone in the living room listening to the distant murmur of their voices, his daughter and this woman who had somehow become important to him. He could hear Emma explaining her artwork, her voice animated and excited, and Victoria responding with what sounded like genuine interest. This was good. This was right. For the first time since Sarah died, Daniel felt like the pieces of his life were coming together into something coherent, something sustainable, something that might actually last. The afternoon passed easily, filled with conversation and laughter and the simple pleasure of being together. Victoria admired Emma's drawings with what seemed like real appreciation. Emma showed off her cartwheels in the living room, nearly knocking over a lamp in the process. They ordered pizza for dinner, Emma's choice, and ate it at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had fallen apart 6 months ago. "I like her," Emma announced after Victoria had gone home, when it was just the two of them again. "Yeah?" "Yeah, she asked good questions, and she really looked at my drawings, not like some grown-ups who just pretend. She's a designer too, remember? Looking at things carefully is part of her job." "I know, but it's still nice." Emma yawned, the long day catching up with her. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart? I think Mommy would like her too." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "What makes you say that?" "Because Mommy liked people who were real. She always said fake people were boring." Emma yawned again. "Victoria seems real. Even when she was mean before, at least she was being real about how she felt." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. His 9-year-old daughter had just articulated something he had been struggling to put into words for months. Victoria was real. Flawed, complicated, capable of both great kindness and great cruelty. But real. And there was something valuable in that, something rare. "Get some sleep, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head. "We have a big week ahead." "What's happening this week?" "I'm presenting the final restaurant designs to the construction team. If everything goes well, they'll start building next month." "Is Victoria going to be there?" "Yes." Emma smiled sleepily. "Good. You always do better when she's around." The presentation went better than Daniel had dared to hope. He stood in the conference room at Victoria's firm, the same conference room where he had made countless presentations before his firing, the same room that had once felt like a prison, and walked the construction team through his vision for the restaurant. The layouts, the materials, the lighting designs, the small details that would make the space feel warm and inviting. Victoria sat in the corner, watching but not interfering. Her presence was calming, grounding. Every time Daniel felt his nerves threaten to overwhelm him, he would glance in her direction and find her looking back with quiet confidence. "You can do this," her eyes seemed to say. "I believe in you." And he could. He did. When the presentation was over, the construction foreman, a grizzled man in his 60s named Frank, approached Daniel with an extended hand. "That's some of the best work I've seen in 30 years, Frank said. "You've got a gift, son." "Thank you. That means a lot." "I mean it. Most architects I work with, they design pretty pictures without thinking about how things actually get built. But you've thought about everything, the flow, the function, the practical stuff that makes a building work." Frank clapped him on the shoulder. "We're going to enjoy building this one." After the construction team filed out, Victoria approached Daniel with a smile that made his heart skip. "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Relieved. Proud." He laughed. "All of the above, like, you should feel proud. That was exceptional. I couldn't have done it without you, without this opportunity. You would have found your way eventually. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it." They stood together in the empty conference room, surrounded by the scattered remains of the presentation, papers and samples, and the digital screen still showing Daniel's designs. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happens now? With us, I mean. We've been, whatever we've been, for a few months now. But I still don't know what to call it, what we are." Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Then she stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell her perfume, could see the small lines around her eyes that appeared when she smiled. "What do you want to call it?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking." "Then let me ask you this." She reached up and straightened his tie, the same gesture she had made on their first date. "When you think about your future, really think about it. Am I in it?" Daniel's breath caught. "Yes." "And Emma? Is she okay with me being part of your life?" "She likes you. She said you seem real. Victoria laughed softly. Real, I suppose that's a compliment. Coming from Emma, it's the highest compliment. She doesn't trust easily. Neither do I. Victoria's expression grew serious. Daniel, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I've hurt people. I've prioritized the wrong things. I've spent so long building walls that I forgot how to let anyone in. I know. I've made mistakes too. But with you, with Emma, I feel like I'm learning to be different, better, more like the person I always wanted to be. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I don't know where this is going. I can't promise that I won't screw up or say the wrong thing or let my work consume me again, but I can promise that I'll try, that I'll keep trying, every day, to be worthy of you. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. That's all I've ever asked from anyone, just trying. Then call it whatever you want, partners, boyfriend and girlfriend, two messy people figuring it out together. Victoria smiled, and in that smile, Daniel saw the future. Not perfect, not certain, but bright with possibility. Whatever we call it, I'm in, for as long as you'll have me. Daniel didn't have words for what he felt in that moment. So instead of speaking, he leaned forward and kissed her, softly at first, then deeper, pouring into that kiss all the gratitude and hope and terrifying vulnerability that had been building in him for months. When they finally broke apart, both of them were slightly breathless. Well, Victoria said, her composure cracked, but her smile wider than ever. That answers my question. What question? Whether you'd ever forgive me for that morning in your kitchen. Daniel laughed, a sound of pure release. I forgave you a long time ago, probably before I even realized it. Good. She straightened her jacket, visibly gathering herself. Because I have one more thing to tell you, and I need you to be sitting down for it. That sounds ominous. It's not. At least I don't think it is. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. I've been thinking about the future. Not just our future, though that's part of it, but the future of the company. My father built this firm. I've spent 6 months trying to figure out what I want it to become. And I want you to be part of it, not as a consultant, not as a contractor. Victoria took a deep breath. I want you to be a partner, Daniel. Equal stake, equal say, equal responsibility. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Victoria, that's insane. After what happened, you proved yourself over and over again. You proved that the Morrison Project wasn't who you are. You proved that given the right support, the right conditions, you're capable of extraordinary things. She held his gaze, unflinching. I'm not offering you this out of guilt or obligation. I'm offering it because it's the right decision for the firm. You make us better, Daniel. You make me better. Daniel sank into one of the conference room chairs, his legs suddenly unsteady. A partnership, an equal stake in the company that had fired him just 6 months ago. It was beyond anything he could have imagined, beyond anything he would have dared to hope for. I need to think about it, he said finally. This is a lot. Take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready. They left the conference room together, walking through the office where Daniel had once been an employee, then a pariah, and now, possibly, a partner. His former colleagues watched them pass with curious eyes, no doubt wondering what had transpired behind those closed doors. Let them wonder, Daniel thought. Let them see that failure isn't the end, that sometimes, impossibly, it's just the beginning. The summer that followed was the happiest Daniel had known in years. Emma finished 3rd grade with honors, her report card decorated with stars and smiley faces and notes from her teacher praising her creativity and kindness. Daniel framed it and hung it on the refrigerator, right next to her latest artwork, a watercolor of the 3 of them together, him and Emma and Victoria, standing in front of a building that looked suspiciously like the restaurant he had designed. Is that the Harper? He asked, studying the painting. Yes. I wanted to draw something important to you. Emma, this is beautiful. Victoria helped me with the shadows. She's really good at shadows. Daniel smiled at the thought of Victoria and Emma, heads bent together over watercolors, working on the painting that would end up on his refrigerator. These 2 people he loved, finding their own connection, building their own relationship separate from him. It was more than he had dared to hope for. It was everything. The restaurant opened in late August to reviews that exceeded everyone's expectations. Food critics praised the innovative menu, the impeccable service, and more than anything, the stunning design that made every meal feel like an experience. The space itself tells a story, one reviewer wrote. You can feel the care that went into every detail, from the placement of each light fixture to the texture of the wood beneath your fingertips. This is architecture as art, as emotion, as an invitation to linger. Daniel read that review a dozen times, letting each word sink in. Architecture is art. Architecture is emotion. It was everything he had always wanted his work to be. Not just functional, not just beautiful, but meaningful. Victoria hosted a celebration dinner at the restaurant on opening night, inviting Marcus and Diane, the construction team, and a few close colleagues who had supported the project from the beginning. Daniel arrived with Emma on his arm, both of them dressed in their finest clothes. "Daddy," Emma whispered as they walked through the front entrance, "this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen." Daniel looked around at the space he had created. The warm lighting, the natural materials, the carefully designed flow that guided guests from entrance to table to kitchen and back again. It was exactly what he had envisioned, exactly what he had fought for through months of revisions and compromises and difficult conversations. "You know what?" he said, squeezing Emma's hand. "I think you might be right." Victoria found them near the bar, her face glowing with pride and something that looked a lot like love. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." She crouched down to Emma's level. "What do you think? Does it live up to your drawing?" "It's better," Emma said seriously. "My drawing didn't have the smell." Victoria laughed. "The smell?" "It smells like happy, like when Daddy makes pancakes on Saturday mornings." "Happy has a smell?" "Everything has a smell if you pay attention." Emma tugged on Victoria's hand. "Can I see the kitchen? I want to see where the food comes from." Victoria looked at Daniel, a question in her eyes. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll be right here." He watched them disappear into the back of the restaurant, Emma chattering excitedly about cooking and smells and the science of flavors, Victoria listening with the patient attention she had learned to give to this child who had somehow become part of her life. Daniel stood alone in the restaurant he had designed, surrounded by the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of glasses, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of problems. There were still bills to pay, still challenges to face, still the everyday difficulties of being a single father and a working professional. But beneath all that, holding it together like the foundation of a building, was peace. The deep, abiding certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He thought about Sarah, as he often did in moments like this. He wondered what she would think of the life he had built from the wreckage of her death. He wondered if she would be proud of him, of Emma, of the choices he had made. He liked to think she would be. The evening wound down slowly, guests departing one by one until only the core group remained: Daniel, Victoria, Emma, and a few close friends who had stayed to help celebrate. They sat together at a table in the corner, drinking wine and telling stories and laughing at jokes that weren't really funny but felt hilarious anyway because they were together. At some point, Emma fell asleep against Daniel's shoulder, exhausted by the excitement of the evening. He shifted her gently, cradling her head in the crook of his arm, and looked across the table at Victoria. She was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite name, tender, wistful, full of something that looked like longing. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, not wanting to wake Emma. "I'm thinking about how different everything looks from where I'm sitting, compared to 6 months ago, compared to a year ago." Victoria shook her head slowly. "I almost destroyed your life, Daniel. I showed up at your apartment and screamed at you in front of your daughter and fired you without giving you a chance to explain. And now here we are." "Here we are?" Daniel agreed. "How did that happen? How did we get from there to here?" Daniel thought about the question. He thought about the morning Victoria had appeared at his door, trembling with rage. He thought about the weeks of despair that had followed, the sleepless nights, and the endless fear and the certainty that his life was over. He thought about Michael's visit, about Sarah's letter, about the conversation in Victoria's office that had changed everything. think we got here by making choices, he said finally. One at a time. You chose to offer me the consulting contract instead of writing me off completely. I chose to accept it instead of letting my pride get in the way. We both chose to see each other as people instead of just roles. It sounds so simple when you put it that way. It wasn't simple. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Daniel looked down at Emma, her face peaceful in sleep, her small hand clutching the fabric of his shirt. But it was worth it. Every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every time I wanted to give up, it was all worth it. Victoria reached across the table and took his hand. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. The partnership offer. Have you thought about it? He had. He had thought about little else in the weeks since Victoria had first mentioned it. The opportunity was extraordinary. A chance to rebuild his career at the highest level, to have a real stake in the company's future, to be more than just a hired hand doing work for someone else's vision. But it was also terrifying. It would mean more responsibility, more pressure, more chances to fail in spectacular fashion. It would mean trusting Victoria completely, trusting that the person who had fired him once wouldn't turn on him again. I have thought about it, he said. A lot. And? Daniel looked around the restaurant, his design, his vision made real. He looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in his arms. He looked at Victoria, watching him with eyes full of hope and something that looked very much like love. Yes, he said. My answer is yes. Victoria's face broke into a smile so radiant it transformed her completely. Really? You're sure? I'm sure. I'm terrified, but I'm sure. He laughed softly. My daughter told me once that fear means it matters, that you should say yes anyway. She's a wise girl. The wisest. They sat together in the quiet restaurant, hands intertwined across the table, while Emma slept and the night deepened around them. Outside, the city hummed with its usual restless energy. Inside, there was only peace. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change and growth. Daniel officially became a partner at Lane and Harper Architecture. The name change had been Victoria's idea, and she had insisted on it despite his protests. His office was next to hers now, a proper workspace with windows and furniture that hadn't been salvaged from a thrift store. Emma adjusted to the new normal with the resilience that children seem to possess in unlimited supply. She started calling Victoria by her first name instead of Daddy's friend from work. She began requesting sleepovers at Victoria's apartment, which was much bigger than theirs and had a view of the park that Emma found endlessly fascinating. She drew more pictures, always of the three of them now, always together. Michael visited for Thanksgiving that year, bringing Jenny and the kids for a chaotic, joyful celebration that filled Daniel's small apartment to bursting. There was too much food and too much noise and not nearly enough space, and it was absolutely perfect. You seem happy, Michael said, pulling Daniel aside while the kids played in Emma's room and the women talked in the kitchen. Like, actually happy, not just pretending. I am happy, for the first time in, God, I don't even know how long. Sarah would be proud of you, you know, not just for the career stuff, but for all of it, for letting yourself live again. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. I hope so. I know so. Michael pulled him into a hug, the kind of tight, backslapping embrace that brothers exchange when words aren't enough. I'm proud of you too, Danny, in case I don't say it enough. You don't. Well, I'm saying it now. Deal with it. Christmas that year was a celebration unlike any Daniel had experienced since Sarah died. Victoria insisted on hosting at her apartment, which was large enough to accommodate everyone comfortably. Michael's family came again, along with a few of Victoria's friends and colleagues who had become part of their extended circle. The tree was massive, nearly touching the ceiling. Emma had helped decorate it, insisting on hanging the gold clay handprint she had made when she was 4, the one her mother had helped her create, the one that now traveled with them to every tree they decorated. This is the most important ornament, she explained to Victoria as she placed it carefully near the top. Because Mommy touched it. Victoria's eyes glistened, but her voice was steady when she responded. Then it should be in the place of honor. That's what Daddy always says. Your daddy is a smart man. Daniel watched this exchange from across the room, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was his family now, not just him and Emma, but this whole chaotic, imperfect, beautiful collection of people who had chosen to love each other. It wasn't the family he had planned. It wasn't the life he had imagined when he was young and certain that the future would unfold exactly as he expected. But it was good. It was real. It was more than he had dared to hope for in those dark days after Victoria had appeared at his door and shattered everything. The evening wound down gradually, guests departing in twos and threes until only the core group remained: Daniel, Victoria, Emma, Michael, Jenny, and the kids sprawled across the living room in various states of food-induced lethargy. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was sleepy, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart? This is the best Christmas ever. You said that last year." "I know, but this year is even better." She yawned, her eyes fluttering closed. "Because Victoria's here, and Uncle Mike and Aunt Jenny and the cousins, and because you're happy." "I am happy, sweetheart." "I know, I can tell." She snuggled closer. "Mommy would be happy too, that you found your smile again." Daniel felt Victoria's hand find his in the darkness, squeezing gently. He looked over at her and saw his own emotion reflected in her eyes, the gratitude, the wonder, the fierce determination to protect this fragile, precious thing they had built together. "I think you're right," he said softly. "I think she would be." The year turned. January brought new projects, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that his second chance had been worthwhile. February brought Valentine's Day, which Daniel spent with both Victoria and Emma because his two favorite people in the world deserved to be celebrated together. March brought the one-year anniversary of the day Victoria had fired him, a date that Daniel had been dreading, certain it would bring back all the pain and fear of that terrible morning. But when the day arrived, he found that the memories had softened somehow. The sharp edges had been worn down by time and healing, by new experiences that had layered over the old ones like fresh paint over scars. Victoria called him that morning early, before Emma was awake. "I've been thinking about what day it is," she said. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay, better than okay, actually. I'm glad. I was worried." "Don't be. That day was the worst day of my life, but it was also the start of something, the start of this." He paused, searching for the right words. "I wouldn't change it, Victoria. Even if I could go back and send that email, prevent the whole thing from happening, I'm not sure I would." "Really?" "Really. Because then I wouldn't have learned what I learned. About myself, about what matters, about how to ask for help when I need it." He smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "That firing was the best thing that ever happened to me. Besides Emma, and you." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I love you, Daniel Harper." It was the first time she had said it, the first time either of them had used those words, despite all the feelings that had been building between them for months. "I love you too," Daniel said. "I have for a while now." "I know. I was just too scared to say it first." "So was I." They laughed together, the tension breaking, the weight of unspoken words finally lifted. "Come over tonight," Victoria said. "Both of you. I'll make dinner." "You can cook?" "No, that's why I'm ordering from that Italian place you like. But I'll plate it very artfully. You'll never know the difference." "Emma will know. She notices everything." "Then I'll bribe her with dessert. I'm very good at bribes." Daniel laughed again, feeling lighter than he had in years. "We'll be there. 6 o'clock." 6 o'clock. "I'll be waiting." They hung up, and Daniel sat in his quiet apartment watching the dawn light creep across the walls. 1 year. It had been 1 year since his life had fallen apart, and now here he was. Happy, successful, in love with a woman who loved him back. Life, he was learning, had a way of surprising you. The worst moments could lead to the best outcomes. The deepest pain could give way to the greatest joy. You just had to be willing to keep going, to keep trying, to keep believing that something better was possible even when all evidence suggested otherwise. Emma emerged from her room a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from her eyes and clutching Mr. Flops in one arm. "Good morning, sweetheart," Daniel said. "How did you sleep?" "Good. I had a dream about pancakes." That sounds like a hint. It is. She climbed onto his lap, still small enough to fit there, though not for much longer. Daddy? Yes? Are we going to see Victoria today? Tonight, she's making us dinner. Emma giggled. Victoria can't cook. I know, she's ordering from the Italian place. Good. I like that place. Emma was quiet for a moment, her fingers playing with the fabric of his sleeve. Daddy, can I tell you something? Always? I'm glad you got fired. Daniel blinked, surprised. What? I know it was really hard. I know you were sad and scared, but if you hadn't gotten fired, you would still be at the old job, and you would still be tired all the time, and we wouldn't have Victoria, and everything would be different. She looked up at him with those big, serious eyes. Sarah's eyes. Always Sarah's eyes. Sometimes bad things lead to good things. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. Daniel felt tears slip down his cheeks, but they were good tears. Healing tears. When did you get so wise? I told you. I'm an old soul. You certainly are. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. And you're right. Sometimes bad things do lead to good things. We just have to be brave enough to keep going until we find them. Like you did. Like we did. Together. Emma smiled, and in that smile Daniel saw everything. The past and the future, the pain and the healing, the love that had carried them through the darkest times and would carry them through whatever came next. Can we have pancakes now? She asked. Absolutely. Extra blueberries? Extra blueberries. You got it. He stood up, setting Emma gently on her feet, and walked toward the kitchen. The morning sun was streaming through the windows now, painting everything in shades of gold. Outside, the city was waking up, the sounds of traffic and voices filtering through the glass. A new day. A new beginning. A life rebuilt from the ashes of the old one, stronger and more beautiful than before. Daniel Harper had been fired in front of his daughter. He had lost everything he thought mattered. He had been broken in ways he hadn't known a person could be broken. And then, somehow, impossibly, he had found his way back. Not to the life he had planned, not to the future he had imagined, but to something better, something truer, something that felt, at long last, like home. He cracked eggs into a bowl and began to whisk. Behind him, Emma set the table, humming a song her mother used to sing. The apartment was small, the furniture was secondhand, and there were still bills to pay and problems to solve, and challenges waiting just around the corner. But none of that mattered, because Daniel Harper had something more valuable than money or success or the approval of the world. He had his daughter. He had Victoria. He had a future worth fighting for. And that, he knew now, was everything. The pancakes were perfect that morning. Golden brown, fluffy, dotted with so many blueberries that Emma declared them the blueberriest pancakes in the history of pancakes. They ate together at the small kitchen table, talking about the day ahead, and the dinner that evening, and all the small, ordinary things that make up a life. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, a car horn honked, a dog barked. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small dramas and quiet triumphs unfolding in one small apartment in one small corner of the city. But in that apartment, at that table, there was only love, only hope, only the sweet, simple joy of a new beginning. And as Daniel Harper looked at his daughter across the table, blueberry juice on her chin and happiness in her eyes, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that was what families did. That was what love did. That was what it meant to be truly, finally, home.